So we're doing a call today on whether we ought to be bowing down to images. We already made a video that was about 4.5 hours long. We made it 1 year ago where we just sat down and read quotes from the church fathers. And there are a few, there's one or two, or maybe a few hundred maybe. So the church fathers we have quoted in this massive document are Peter and the recognitions of Clement, and then Clement of Rome himself. We color code it on this website. I could send you the link here so you can all look at it for yourself. I'll drop it here in the discussion. And this is just a sampling because we don't have time to get every single quote from the fathers on this issue. But the thing is, every time you look up what the fathers say, they always say the same thing. That's the great thing about being right about something, is that if you just let the fathers speak for themselves and you don't have an agenda, you can just go look up what they say every time on an issue, and they're always going to say the same thing. They're always going to agree with each other. And on this issue of bowing down to images, you're just going to see perfect unanimity for centuries, for the first 100, 200 years, 300 years, 400 years. And I have not even found anybody up until the 500s who ever endorses bowing down to images or burning incense to images or burning incense at all. The church outlawed burning incense at all as a form of worship to God all the way until the late 400s. The late 400s are the first time you have somebody talking about that. It's Theodoret of Cyrus. But the church up until his time had categorically forbidden and made fun of the idea of offering literal incense to God. So there's a lot of heresies they're guilty of here, and the burning incense and the image veneration go together. They think that God wants to be worshipped with these pictures. That is the only question that you should be asking yourself is, does God want to be worshipped this way? Did he say, I want to be worshipped when people bow down to my images? Is that what he said? Did he say, I want to be worshipped through blocks of stone, blocks of wood? I want people to bow down to pictures of me and then burn incense and sense the images as they do. Well, you're going to find God nowhere says that in Scripture and nowhere in church history. And on the complete contrary, both in the Old Testament, New Testament, and in all the writings of the fathers up until the 500s, they unanimously condemn it. They make fun of it. Boy, do they punk it. Just the idea of ever bowing down to an image, a block of stone. And they talk about the definition of bowing. So I'll explain this to you, Michael. You know how the image venerators, the image lovers are called iconodules. You can look this up anywhere online. Surely, if you've heard their apologetics, they call people who don't bow down to images, they call them iconoclasts, but they call themselves iconodules. And they engage in iconodulia. And with Mary, you've probably heard this, that they engage in hyperdulia. That means extra super dulia. But what is dulia? Maybe you haven't seen this before. But dulia is a very common word in the Greek language. It shows up many times in the Old Testament, in the Greek Septuagint. You've probably seen all these instances before, but I'll just point them out to you again. In Exodus 13, Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of dulia. For with a strong hand the Lord brought you forth. Again, it says in Leviticus, if your brother has grown poor among you and sells himself to you, you shall not make him to serve as a doulos, slave. Here in Ephesians, Paul says, you doulias, you doulos, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling. This is the word doulia. It's slave, slavery. Paul says, for you didn't receive the spirit of doulia, again, to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. In Galatians, he says, now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, does not differ at all from a slave, though he is master of all. Surely you've seen something like this, Michael. Did you know that dulia means slavery? You ever heard that before? So they're image slaves. That's the doctrine of the Cathodox. Servant, slave, there's no difference in the Greek. They're slaves. Do you see how silly that would be, Michael, to say, well, I'm a servant, but I'm not a slave? If those two words are the exact same word in Greek, slave and servant mean the same thing, don't they? That would just be silly. If you're going to embrace being a servant of images, you need to embrace being a slave of images. They are the same thing. You agree? That's a pretty silly thing to say. And I love that, though. I love that response because I'm sure that the Cathodox would say the same thing. I know that you're a pending Cathodox. You're researching it. I'm proud of you. Good job. But they would say the same thing. They're no different. They'd be like, oh, I'm a servant. I thought I'm not a slave. Well, then you are uncomfortable with this idea, aren't you? Sounds kind of bad, doesn't it? Sounds, being an image slave is what you call yourself. And what is the sin of image slavery? Here, I wrote a little summary for you based on what the church fathers say. And after I read the summary, we're going to actually read what the church fathers say. The sin of making yourself a slave to dead images is a crime against nature and against God. A man ought not to exchange clothing with a woman because it's demeaning to him as the image of God to wear the token of submission on his head, a veil. And also, a man ought not to be ruled by his children because it's a perversion of God's created order if a man is ruled by his own children, who he created. A man degrades himself if he has sex with an animal because an animal is a lower species than man, and man shouldn't perform the marital act with a lower species. So you see, Michael, crimes against the natural order of creation are the worst kinds of sin, and bowing to images is worse than being a slave to your own children or exchanging clothing with a woman, which God calls an abomination, because even women and children are living human beings, but an image is lifeless matter. So slavery to an image is an even greater perversion than a man dressing up in women's clothes or a man obeying his wife and his children, because at least, the woman is alive, but an image is dead. An image is dead. The women and children are alive. So if it's a great abomination, a great perversion to be a slave to your children and your wife who are your subordinates, how much more perverted is it to bow down to an image which wasn't even alive and to call yourself a slave of something dead, something that your own hands created? You're going to hear the church fathers say this over and over again. And you guys are the image of God. As the image of God and the representation of God on the earth, if you bow down to dead images, you make this abominable analogy of God calling his own creation his master and becoming enslaved to it, saying, "You're my master, I'm your slave." Can you imagine God saying that? Well, you're the image of God. You're supposed to be standing in for God. You're not even allowed to voluntarily enslave yourself to a living person. But you're doing something worse than that. You're making yourself a slave to a block of wood. You know how crazy that is? The church fathers are about to talk about it, how crazy it is to say, I'm a slave to this piece of wood. And it's a holy, divine icon. They'll always say, it's not the icon. No, it's the person represented. But then they'll turn around and say, this is the holy, divine icon. And we're willing to die and to kill to protect these blocks of wood. So now you're proving it's not just what the icon represents. It is the block of wood itself. So this sin is similar to bestiality and earth worship, which share a hierarchy reversal, which is when humans are meant to rule over creation as God's representatives, but instead they see inferior things as equals, or even worse, as masters over them. So it's like making an animal a master over you, a man, or it's like making a woman or a child. It's even worse than those things. It's worse than you exchanging clothes with a woman. It's worse than you being a cross-dresser, which God calls an abomination, when you bow yourself down to a dead image. Now, do you understand this too, Michael? We made a video, and I can show you this. I'll show you this video we made to educate you. Here, behold. Here's a video we made not too long ago where we give the definition of dulia, and where we also give many instances in Scripture where bowing is clearly laid out. To bow down to something means that you're inferior to that thing. It means that you're subservient to it. It means you're indebted to it. When you bow down to a person, you're saying, you person I am indebted to. I am beneath me. You rule over me. You are over me. And sometimes if a person has some great favor done to them, they would bow down. Like Abraham bowed down to the sons of Heth. He says, you guys just gave me a plot of land. I'm a foreigner in your land, but you gave me a plot of land to bury my wife. And he bowed down to them because they were so generous. They even offered to give it to him for free. And Abraham saw himself as completely indebted to them, and he bowed down. He was saying, I am your servant. I am indebted to you. You guys are free to command me. Tell me what you want me to do. I am at your service. That's what it means to bow down. Anyway, we show that in the video. There are many, many examples, so I won't harp on it. So when you bow down to an image, you are saying, you, image, are my superior. You are over me. I mean, that's the literal picture you're making. If you let something else stand upright and then you bow down and make yourself low and flat in front of it, that's a great perversion. You're not allowed to do that to images. Again, I want to remind you, Michael, and anybody else watching, the only question you should be asking yourself is this something that God has commanded us to do? You can't just say, well, I have a bunch of clever arguments. I have a bunch of philosophical arguments I came up with. That doesn't matter to God. Did he command it? It's kind of like when I tell you the Catholics and Orthodox have the funniest arguments when they believe in the Assumption of Mary. And this is just a side note. I'm not going to harp on this, but they'll say, well, of course we know that Mary was assumed into heaven. And they'll say, well, if you could take your mother to heaven, wouldn't you do it? I mean, as if me wanting to take my mother to heaven just means that Mary was assumed into heaven. I mean, now, if you're going to use subjective arguments like that, emotional arguments, not historical arguments, not arguments based on tradition, you could just say, well, man, if I could just let everybody go to heaven, I would do it. Therefore, everybody's in heaven right now, just because I say so. Or if you want to say, Mary is sinless, because if you could make your mother sinless, wouldn't you do it? All right, well, everybody's sinless now. Or else why didn't Jesus do that? Jesus, you should just make everybody sinless. Such subjective reasoning. Are you the ancient church or not, you Catholics? Give us the traditions of the fathers. We're not Protestants. We want the traditions of the fathers. We obey the unanimous teachings of the fathers. Now, Michael, who I'm addressing this response to right here, and by the way, you're welcome to join in and talk to me. I'm not going to attack you. I'm not going to be rough with you. I'll be firm with you, but I really would like it if you could engage with me. You don't have to, but it's okay. But I want to point out these things you're saying here. You said this. He said, Luke, consider if there is any evidence that could ever convince you that you are wrong. And you said, we're all capable of being obstinate. Well, that's true. But Michael, what is the evidence that we are asking for? All that we ask for is the unanimous teaching of the Church Fathers. Let me ask you something, Michael. Do the Catholics claim that there is a unanimous testimony from the Ante-Nicene Fathers, or even a unanimous testimony from the Fathers of the first 500 years of church history, that we ought to be bowing down to images? Is there any teaching like that in the first 500 years that we should be bowing down to images? No. There is not a single church father teaching the doctrine of bowing down to images. Not even one. Not even one solitary quote. Do you know what you do have? You have forgeries. They have forged quotes from Athanasius and forged quotes from Basil, which they are all aware are forgeries that were presented at the Second Council of Nicaea. Completely made up fake quotes. Why would they need to rely on fake quotes if they have legitimate quotes? You guys realize in all the quotes you're about to read here, I'll zoom out a little bit for you in case you can't see how many it is. Here, let's see here. Let's see, we've got Apostle Peter, we've got Clement of Rome, Ignatius, Mathetes, Aristides, Justin Martyr. I mean, actually, here's the full list if you wanted here. Here we go. Look, do we need fake quotes? Look how many people we have. We have the most renowned writings. We don't have anything obscure or weird. We didn't dig up weird quotes. We've got Peter, Clement of Rome, Ignatius of Antioch, Mathetes, Aristides, Justin Martyr, Tatian, Melito of Sardis, Theophilus, Athenagoras, Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, Tertullian, Mark Minucius Felix, Hippolytus, Origen, Commodianus, Cyprian, Valentine of Terni, Methodius, Arnobius, Lactantius, Apostolic Constitutions, Council of Elvira, and then look at the post-Nicene era. Do you see how many quotes there are from the post-Nicene era? There's even more. They bash images in the post-Nicene era, in the 300s, more than they do in the ante-Nicene church. Even more, because, of course, we have more writings. If you want to focus entirely on the post-Nicene era, I'd be happy to do that, because you don't have hardly any apologetics online talking about how much the post-Nicene church bashes image veneration of any kind, even Christian images. But again, you've got Eusebius, Anthony the Great, Athanasius, Zeno of Verona, Macarius of Egypt, Epiphanius, John Chrysostom, Hilary of Poitiers, Ephraim the Syrian, Gregory of Nyssa. You have everybody. You have every name you could possibly ask for, including Basil. Basil bashes image veneration. They take one quote from him out of context, and then they have another that's a completely forged quote, and that's all they've got. Well, I could show you lots from Basil bashing image veneration. Real quotes, not fake quotes. Everybody. Augustine bashes image veneration. There's the funniest one from Asterius. That is a funny one. Let me show you something in my little document I have. They have this quote from a guy named Asterius. You just cannot make this up. I have on this on these Orthodox websites sometimes they'll quote from Asterius, and they'll say yes, Asterius. They'll say Asterius, during the iconoclast controversy at the Second Council of Nicaea, with a play on his name, he was referred to as a bright star illuminating the minds of all. See, this is just so hilarious. Sometimes they will quote somebody like Asterius, and they'll actually end up destroying themselves with the very person that they bring up. Sometimes the very quotes they're quoting absolutely demolish them. And it turns out this quote that they have from Asterius, it's a quote from him just admiring a painting. He's not saying anybody is bowing down to it or venerating it, but it's a quote from a time when he was actually a pagan. He hadn't even converted to Christianity yet, and he was not talking about any murals that he found of anybody bowing to them. You'll see. But it's just hilarious, you know. We have actual quotes from Asterius saying, you know, nobody should ever be having pictures of Jesus. You know, just too funny, this kind of thing. Just all of it is just too hilarious. Anyway, I mean, we've got the whole gang here. Everybody is against images. I would just challenge, since it would take us 7 hours, Michael, I want you to tell me something. You said, what kind of evidence would I need? I'm going to ask you what kind of evidence you need. Yes, let's do the Saints. I'm happy to do that. What kind of evidence do you need? Before I show you these quotes, you need to have a philosophical framework set up here. You need to ask yourself, if all the church fathers really do say this, could it possibly be a heresy if they're all agreeing on this for so many hundreds of years? Could that possibly be? I mean, I want you to put it in this perspective here. Imagine if we had 50 church fathers. See, I have 55 quoted here of all the most prominent, most famous church fathers of just the first 400 and barely 500. See, I do a couple from the 500, just a tiny bit, but most of them are first 400 or so, 400 years. But if I had all the church fathers of the first 400 years saying that Jesus Christ is not the Son of God, and saying, oh, there is no Trinity, there's only, you know, one God, the Father, and, you know, and then they're endorsing Unitarianism, modalism, or something. What would that do to you, Michael? What would it do to anybody? Could they still be a Trinitarian if the entire church condemned that doctrine for 500 years or 400 years? Could you? Wouldn't you say that is a major problem? Would you even dare bring up some painting you found in a catacomb? Well, I found a painting. You found a what? Every single church father condemns this idea. Yeah, but I found a painting. From who? Whose painting? What's their name? Well, I don't know their name, but I found a painting. What are you talking about? The church's doctrines don't come from paintings. Who even made it? What was their name? What period of time? What time period did they live in? Well, I don't know. They lived somewhere, you know, in history, maybe 300s, 200s. I'm not sure really, but they were just, somebody drew a painting and it said, you know, Jesus is God. By the way, we all believe in the Trinity. We all believe that Jesus is God. I'm just saying how absolutely detrimental to the faith this would be if it could be proven they unanimously teach against something, and you're bringing paintings. What if you had all the church fathers of the first 500 years saying that, you know, faith is all you need to be saved and works are useless? Would you really bring me a painting? You just say, well, we got a painting contradicting that from some nameless person. Every single church father teaches that faith alone is all you need. You know, this is a hypothetical. This is a crazy situation for you to see how crazy this would be. Maybe I should reverse it, though. I should say, you know, what if you have every single church father saying that Jesus is divine, but then you have one painting saying, no, he's not divine? Wouldn't you say that's completely ridiculous? Or what if I had 100 paintings with words that said Jesus is not divine? Would you care? Would you not say to me immediately, you're crazy? A crazy heretic wrote that. We don't go with a painting statement. We go with the unanimous teaching of the church. Isn't that what you would say, Michael? Isn't it what any rational person would say? I go with the unanimous teaching of the church. I couldn't care less if you found some paintings made by random nameless people. That's not where the church's doctrines come from. The church's doctrines come from the unanimous teaching of the church, which can be traced to the very beginning of church history, and which can be found in all the several locations on the earth that are spread far apart by many miles, especially the main patriarchates: Rome, Antioch, Jerusalem, Alexandria. We should be able to find all of them teaching the same thing from the beginning. You agree? Yes. Okay, well, let me ask you something, Michael. Before, you're saying let's go from 300s to 500s, but let me ask you something, Michael. Do you concede that all the church fathers of the first 300 years condemn bowing down to images? Do you concede that? Is that an easy thing for you to concede? Don't you see that already is the end? Because if you could concede that, then why are we even discussing it? How could it possibly be an orthodox doctrine? Yeah. All right, let's do it. Let's do it hypothetical, Michael. Let's pretend all the writings of the church for the first 300 years don't exist. And let's just see what they say from the year 300 onward. Okay? Yeah, but do they reject Irenaeus? Irenaeus bashes image veneration. Melito, Justin Martyr, all of them do. Matthias, Ignatius, they all bash it. Clement of Rome, Peter in the book Recognitions of Clement bashes it to no end. Second Clement bashes it. This is a unanimous testimony. This isn't just people like Origen. Yeah. All right. Well, why don't we just stick to the canonized ones then? I want to show you something. I want to show you one of the craziest statements ever from Ignatius of Antioch. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, Ignatius says in his letter to the Romans, chapter 3, when he's about to be taken off to die, he says, "Only request in my behalf both inward and outward strength, that I may not only speak, but truly will, and that I may not merely be called a Christian, but really be found to be one. For if I be truly found a Christian, I may also be called one, and be then deemed faithful when I shall no longer appear to the world." Interesting. He's going to no longer appear to the world. He says, "Nothing visible is eternal. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. For our God, Jesus Christ, is more visible now that he is in the Father." What does he mean by that, Michael? Don't you think that's a very odd statement? Wasn't Jesus more visible while he was walking the earth? How is it that after he's taken off the earth, Ignatius says he is actually more visible now that he is in the Father? He says, "Nothing visible is eternal, but the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal." And he compares that to Jesus. Let me show you what Ignatius means. There are so many church fathers that talk about this, but let me give you one from one of the most famous of all the Catholic saints. He's a doctor in the Catholic Church and considered one of the foremost defenders of the Orthodox faith in the face of the Arian crisis. He would be second to Athanasius. I think every scholar, every Cathodox teacher would agree that behind Athanasius was Hilary of Poitiers, writing his huge book on the Trinity, refuting the Arians. So let's see if this great defender of orthodoxy agrees with the Catholics and Orthodox about the necessity of being able to see images of Jesus and whether a picture is an image of Jesus. By the way, guys, there's a separate section on the website. I want to show you real quick here. I'm going to post it. This is an image of God section. Do you see this? Tons of church fathers, tons and tons and tons quoted on the subject. Ambrose, Hilary, Didymus the Blind, Ephraim the Syrian, Basil, Gregory of Nyssa, everybody. It's the whole gang. John Chrysostom, Augustine, okay? Everybody. And by the way, we barely even began to collect quotes. They all agree on what the image of God is. This is something you have never heard before, I guarantee you. Yes, we are going to stay focused. I just want you to know what the image of God is, because Hilary is going to talk about it. And it's a new concept for you, what the image of God is. The image of God is not a physical, visible thing. The image of God is something completely invisible. Jesus being the image of God is not referring to what he looks like. Remember that it says he is the image of the invisible God. So if God is invisible, then the image of the invisible God is also invisible. Okay, but let's hear what Hilary says. He's going to explain what Ignatius means. He says, some, however... Yes, here we go. We're going to read some Catholic and Orthodox saints who rejected icon veneration. And remember, we know that some people made pictures. That is not part of the debate. It is totally dishonest and pathetic. When Catholics and Orthodox hear all the church fathers condemning this practice of bowing down to images and burning incense to them, and then they say, But look, we can find some paintings made by some people in the early church. What does that have to do with bowing down to images and burning incense to them? Having a picture does not mean that anybody was bowing down to it and burning incense to it. And by the way, even if you could prove that people were bowing down to it and burning incense to it, which you can't, you still can't prove that this is a doctrine from the church fathers. You need to prove that the fathers taught this. Because you already admit that if you found a bunch of paintings saying that Jesus is not God, you would reject that because you know what the universal teaching of the fathers is, right? If we all agree with that principle, that you couldn't care less how many hundreds of paintings you found on a wall that taught heresy, it would mean nothing to you as long as you have the whole unanimous testimony of the church teaching something different. Okay, I've digressed enough. Here is Hilary, and he says in his book on the Trinity, some, however, worshipped those corporeal and visible forms of created things themselves in the elements of earth and heaven. Lastly, certain individuals placed their gods in the images of man, animals, beasts, and serpents, and confined the God of the universe and the author of infinity within the narrow limits of metals, stones, and genealogies. Now, is he speaking favorably about this or bashing this? The idea of making images of man and confining the God of the universe and the author of infinity within the narrow limits of metal, stone, and genealogies. He says, and it was no longer fitting that they who cling to such ridiculous, degrading, and irreligious theories should be the teachers of the truth, when these men themselves were not in agreement about the principles of their most idiotic beliefs. In God, however, nothing was to be worshipped except what was eternal and omnipotent. You understand? Nothing is to be worshipped. That is, nothing is to be bowed down to. That's the word he's using. Nothing is to be bowed down to except what is eternal and omnipotent. That's what it means to worship in spirit and in truth. You don't have objects sitting down in front of you. That's not what we worship. We worship something invisible. He says, desist, O groundless fear of the heretics. He's talking about being afraid of images. And do not lie as if you wish to protect the faith of the church by falsely pretending that you are over-solicitous about this statement. According to our explanation, there is nothing corporeal, nothing lifeless in the things of God. I would ask any Catholics, are your images alive? If you want to say that your image is alive, I'd like to hear that. What part of your block of wood or stone is alive? He says there is nothing corporeal, nothing lifeless in the things of God. What is God is wholly God, completely God. In him there is nothing but power, life, light, blessedness, and spirit. His nature is incompatible with the dull elements of matter. He continues, it was not the carnal body which he had received by birth from the Virgin that could manifest to them the image and likeness of God. The human aspect which he wore could be no aid towards the mental vision of the incorporeal God. Let me read that one more time for you, Michael. It was not the carnal body which he had received by birth from the Virgin that could manifest to them the image and likeness of God. Do you understand that? It's no aid. It doesn't help them in seeing God. When they say, oh, it's God in the flesh, that is a heresy to say that you actually see God by looking at his flesh. You do not see God by looking at Jesus' flesh. That is a heresy. Have you read Hebrews? What it says? He passed through the veil. This is in Hebrews. This is in Hebrews 10. He says, therefore, brethren, since we have confidence to enter the holy place, he's speaking metaphorically here, since we have confidence to enter the holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he inaugurated for us through the veil, that is his flesh. Let us approach with full assurance of faith, yada, yada. So he says, Jesus entered through the veil, that is his flesh. So Jesus' flesh is actually a veil. It's a covering. It covers up and obscures his true essence, who and what he really is. You understand, and Augustine is about to say this, I'm just going to read Hilary first, but all the church fathers agree on this, that you actually are not aided by seeing Jesus' body. It's an obstacle. It's a covering. See, if you wanted to see God, you would have to see him with mental vision. You would have to imagine what he really is and look past what you're seeing with your eyes, because your eyes are telling you that's just a man sitting in front of you, and an ugly one too, as all the church fathers say. He was an ugly man. They say his ugliness made it so hard to believe in him, because he just looked like an average guy. He did not look like anything divine. Anyway, I just want you to chew on this. This is killer. This is the end of the Cathodox, this statement here. It was not the carnal body which he had received by birth from the Virgin that could manifest to them the image and likeness of God. The human aspect which he wore could be no aid towards the mental vision of the incorporeal God. Other images made of metals or colors or other materials by various arts reproduce the appearance of the objects which they represent, yet can lifeless copies be put on a level with their living originals? Painted or carved or molten effigies with a nature which they imitate? The Son of God is not the image of the Father after such a fashion as this. He is the living image of the living. What do you think about this, Michael? Do you see any contradiction in these statements compared to what the Cathodox say? You can read it a few times to let it really sink in. They say that a painting is the image of God. Surely you've heard this. The Cathodox think that a picture made by human beings with paint, made out of metal and wood and stone, is the image of God. No church father thinks that the image of God is a visible, physical thing. They all say it is invisible. They say there is nothing corporeal, nothing lifeless in the things of God. His nature is incompatible with the dull elements of matter. He says his body could not manifest to them the image and likeness of God. You understand? But they think that by having a picture of somebody's imagination of what Jesus' body looked like, they're getting to see God. They love to say that. Here, let me show you some people saying it. You can see God by looking at images. Just want to make sure you know this is really what they teach. Like, here's Peter, let's watch this. Let's here's.
The face of the Father is the face of the incarnate Son. So what face are we going to be dwelling and looking at right here? The one who is incarnate, the one who is in all the icons. Why is it so important to have icons? All of you iconoclasts out there, what are you doing? How can you have blank walls when the whole point is to see the face of God and he's been revealed to us, and that face we will see and he will judge us and we will see him for eternity. And that is the whole point. How can you have blank walls, white walls in your churches? You have no idea what you're doing. Iconoclasts are heretics of the worst kind. How can you not want to see the face of Christ? How can you be against icons? How can you imagine icons are a bad thing? Bow down and venerate that face. That is your judge. That is your goal, to see that face eternally, to be in communion with him. This is what it's all about, to see the face of God.
So we're going to read a few more quotes here. We're going to read them from Augustine, John Chrysostom, and others. They're all going to talk about it, what the actual face of God is. Do you guys understand? Jesus was not a human before he became a human, before he became man. Did you know that? His essence is something completely beyond that physical matter. When Jesus says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God," what is he indicating except that people don't get to see God unless they're righteous? But do you guys know that a lot of people got to see Jesus' face? Were they all pure in heart? No. So did they get to see God? No, they did not get to see God. That carnal body Jesus had was no aid in manifesting to them what God looks like. To see God, you have to be transformed. And really, you have to be deified. When Christ returns, we'll be able to see him just as he is, it says in 1 John 3, because we'll be like him. That's what you should be looking forward to doing, is actually seeing Jesus as he is, not as he looked on earth. That's not how he is. Don't you understand? Jesus at the Transfiguration, man, I need so many scriptures right now. Let me show you something. At the Transfiguration, in John 17, Jesus showed the apostles what he is. And by the way, they could barely even handle it. They couldn't even look at it because they weren't like him yet. When we become like Jesus, then we'll be able to see him just as he is. Let me show you 1 John 3. John says, "Behold what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God. Therefore the world does not know us, because it did not know him. Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be. But we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. And everyone who has this hope in him purifies himself just as he is pure." Remember when Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God"? You understand, guys, getting to see Jesus' his face is not much of a privilege. Let me show you that. Let me see here. Augustine. Listen to Augustine. He says, "You need not rate too highly the privilege of seeing that servile form. His friends saw it, and his foes saw it. Some who saw it slew him. Others who did not see it have believed. Here in his humble lifetime, his servant form was seen by the good and the wicked. And on Judgment Day, too, both good and wicked will see that servile form." Do you guys understand? He is still referring to Jesus' human form as not his true divine essence. That's something only the pure in heart get to see. Read the sentence one more time, Michael. "You need not rate too highly the privilege of seeing that servile form." What? Is that something the Catholics would ever say? Do they rate highly the privilege of seeing Jesus' servile form? Yeah, they do. They think that's really great. Let me show you what it says in the scriptures. It says, "Now after 6 days Jesus took Peter, James, and John his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. Then Peter answered and said to Jesus," he says something very similar to what the Catholics would say, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." Was God pleased with that, by the way? The idea of making temples in honor of saints? Did God like that idea? While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. Hear him." And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces and were greatly afraid. By the way, that means God doesn't want them to build tabernacles for all the saints. But Jesus came and touched them and said, "Arise and do not be afraid." When they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. So guys, you understand what Jesus' true form is? Jesus showed them just for a moment that his true essence, his true form, is something no human can stand to look at. And by the way, he's showing them what his resurrected body is going to look like someday. When that resurrected body becomes spiritual and is no longer mere flesh and blood with veins and intestines and organs inside of it, flowing around and, defecating and all that. When that body is transformed and becomes totally spiritual, pure light, you're not going to be able to look at that. Your eyes won't even be able to stand it. You'll go blind. You'll die, actually. Nobody can look at him and live. Remember, he said that to Moses, "No one can see me and live." They all knew that. They knew that they couldn't look at Jesus and survive it if he was showing them what he really looks like. He can't even show them a tiny bit of it without them just being terrified and falling over. Okay, so you understand then this is the real form. This is something this is what Jesus really is, really what he looks like, and nobody can stand to look at it. That's what you should be desiring to see. And by the way, you only get to see that if you're pure in heart. You can't even see it with your physical eyes. God has to transform you and make you like him and deify you for you to be able to see that. Let me read it one more time. "You need not rate too highly the privilege of seeing that servile form." He's saying even seeing the living Jesus, his physical body, is not that great of a privilege, let alone a dead image. Yes, I am focusing on saints, Michael. Do you know who this is? This is Augustine. Who did you think I was quoting from? I've quoted from Hilary, Augustine, and Ignatius. Do you understand Ignatius' quote now? What does he say? "Nothing visible is eternal, for the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. For our God, Jesus Christ, is more visible now that he is in the Father." Michael, do your best. I want you to tell me what Ignatius means by this. How is Jesus more visible now that he is in the Father? What is your answer? I'll tell you what the correct answer is, if you can't. But you're going to give your best guess. I want to see. I would guess human form put away. You got it, Michael. Perfect. Human form gone. Only the pure in heart see God. Did you know, Michael, that even right now, we with our spiritual eyes look upon Christ, even right now, and we see him more clearly than when he was walking around with a veil on. Jesus was walking around with a veil, that is his human body, obscuring his true glory. Does that make sense? I hope it's all clicking for you. This is the apostolic faith right here that I'm sharing with you. But let's read some more. Eusebius is a saint, is he not? Do they not love Eusebius? Eusebius. Here is feast day. His feast days. Oh, he has multiple feast days. Are they not going to call the chief historian of church history? Not going to call him a saint? I'm still going to read him because he's in complete agreement. What Eusebius says here is in perfect alignment with all the pre-Nicene Christians. All right, we're going to read it then. Let us read it. This is from his letter to Constantia. Okay, we're going to read this first. We're going to jump around just a little bit, but I will do the saints that you're asking for. He says to Constantia, this is Constantine's sister, he says, since you have written about a certain image, as if it were of Christ, desiring that such an image be sent to you by us, what do you mean? And what is this image that you say is of Christ? I do not know where this idea originated from, that you command us to draw an image of our Savior. What image of Christ do you seek? Do you seek the true and unchanging one, bearing the natural features of himself? Or do you seek the one which he took upon himself for us, putting on the form of a servant? For the word of God, and God, taking the form of a servant, condemned sin in the likeness of sinful flesh, as the divine apostle says. Thus he redeemed us from the old bitterness and demonic bondage with his precious blood, setting us free. Therefore, since two forms of him are presented, I do not think that you seek the form of God, having been taught by him once that no one knows the Father except the Son, nor does anyone know the Son properly except the Father who generated him. By the way, that reminds me of another passage which Augustine talks about, where he says, Jesus says, that if we go to the Father, or that, if we believe in the Son, then the Father and the Son will come to us, and it says, and they will reveal themselves to us. Augustine is saying, how is it that the Father and the Son will reveal themselves to us in the book of John, if seeing Jesus' body already is having Jesus revealed to you? But no, that is not truly having God revealed to you, just to look at Jesus' flesh, which died. You understand that flesh died? It was torn apart. I mean, a body that's dead and torn apart is not worth worshiping, is it? You realize that body doesn't exist anymore. That body was completely transformed, completely changed. It was turned into pure light. It's amazing how they say, the Shroud of Turin, that's Jesus, that's proof of Jesus' body, which I don't believe, and there's a lot of reasons not to do it. But they say that there's this proof that it was all lit up, that a million volts of pure light or electricity or something, zapped it, and they say only pure light could do this. So they believe Jesus' body was transformed. They will say that it became pure light, but then they'll be obsessed with his physical, earthly form. By the way, it really is necessary that we read some scriptures, but we'll finish reading this first. I mean, actually, I have to. You have to allow me to. I want to show you. Well, actually, he quotes. Okay, never mind. Our dear Eusebius is going to quote the very passages that I was going to quote to you. So we'll just keep reading. Okay. He says, but surely you seek the form of the servant, and that which he put on for our sake, that is, flesh. But we have also learned that this is mingled with the glory of the divinity, and that the mortal has been swallowed up by life. And it is not at all surprising if after his ascension into heaven, he appeared in such a way, when even while still living among men, the word of God, giving his chosen ones an earnest, just meaning a down payment, of the vision of his own kingdom, having changed the form of the servant, revealed that very form on the mountain above human nature, when his face shone like the sun, and his garments were as white as light. So you understand what he's saying? He's saying even after Jesus' resurrection, he was still in disguise and put on a human form, even though his true glorious form, his form had been changed into something far more glorious. So he was still incognito. He was still wearing a disguise. He says, who then would be able to inscribe on dead and lifeless colors and shadows, that's talking about a painting, the gleaming and flashing radiance of such great worth and glory, when even the divine disciples could not bear to look at him when he appeared in this way, but fell on their faces, confessing that the sight was unbearable for them. If therefore his form in the flesh then received such power, being transformed by the divinity dwelling in him, what shall we say, when, having put off mortality and washed away corruption, He changed the form of the servant into the glory of the Lord and God, after the victory over death, and after the ascension into heaven, and after being seated on the royal throne at the right hand of the Father, after the rest in the ineffable and indescribable bosom of the Father, into which, when he ascended and was seated, the heavenly powers cried out, saying, Lift up your gates, O gates, and be lifted up, O eternal doors, and the King of glory shall come in. Therefore, even the form of the servant, when it became such, was completely transformed, and shone with an ineffable and indescribable light, a light worthy of God the Word himself, a light which eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor has it entered the heart of man. How then could any of the weak attain to it? And how could anyone paint an image of such a marvelous and incomprehensible form, if indeed it should be still called a form, this divine and intellectual essence? Unless, like the unbelieving nations, someone were to paint things that are in no way like themselves, just as a painter paints things that are nothing like them. For such people, when they make idols, as they thought, or any so-called heroes, or anything of that kind, they would want to mold and represent nothing similar or even close, being able to paint only strange shadows, carving out misshapen figures. Do you see how he completely rejects the idea of making an image either of Jesus' old servile form of a human or of trying to draw that indescribable light? You'd be crazy to try to draw. Like, what are you going to do? Just use white and yellow colors? Like, oh, I'm drawing the sun, and that's what Jesus looks like. Or are you going to draw that servile form which he put on for your sake, which was a humiliating thing to him? You understand you're not going to have that in heaven. You are going to be like him. You are not going to have flesh and blood like that. You're not going to have skin cells with little hairs sticking out of your body. You're not going to have oil excreting from your skin or anything like that, sweat and sweat glands and all this stuff. You're not going to have that anymore. Your whole body is going to be transformed into pure light. Do you get that? That's what's waiting for you. And guess what? You'll get to have it if you really want it. But if you don't want it, and if you're obsessed with this earthly flesh, then that's what you're going to have for eternity. And that's what you're going to suffer in for eternity. That's what you really want. Time to abandon that and start looking forward to what's really promised to you, and start knowing Christ according to his true essence, and worship him with your mind instead of with your eyeballs. He says, surely you too would agree that it is not right for us to do such things. But if you say that you are not asking, now listen to this, Michael. He's talking to Constantia. He says, but if you say that you are not asking for an image of his form transformed into God, but rather the form of his flesh before the transformation, that is, of his mortal body, did the reading escape you, where God commanded not to make any likeness of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath? Or have you heard such a thing in the church, either from yourself or from someone else? Has not such a thing been banished throughout the whole world, and exiled far from the churches, and has it not been proclaimed to all that we alone are not permitted to do such a thing? So you understand, Michael? Even if a Cathodox were to say, well, no, this is only talking about making images to worship. That's all God is talking about. You can make decorations. Fine. Let's say that that is true. We'll concede that. Even Clement of Alexandria and Tertullian say there's nothing wrong with making decorations. What is being forbidden here then? Making a form to worship as God. You're not allowed to do that. God has forbidden that. That has been banished throughout the whole world. Christians do not construct a wooden object, a golden or metal or stone object, and bow down to that and worship that object. They don't bow down to it. They don't burn incense to it. Does that make sense? That's what we're forbidden from doing. Decorations are one thing. To actually make an object for the sake of bowing down to it and worshiping it is totally forbidden. He continues. He says, for I do not know how. So Constantia told him about something, and now he's responding to that. He's saying, well, I do not know how a certain woman once held 2 tablets, as if they were philosophers, and declared them to be of Paul and the Savior. I cannot say where she got them, or where she learned this. In order that neither she nor others might be scandalized, that means caused to stumble, I took them from her, and kept them myself. Notice how Eusebius did not destroy them, but he took them. I took them from her and kept them myself, not thinking it right to bring these things out to others, lest we might seem to carry around our God in an image, as idolaters do. So tell me, Michael, is he only bashing images of pagan gods or images of God, Jesus, the Father? He's clearly bashing Christian images and saying that we're going to carry around God in our pocket. We don't do that. He says, I hear that Paul teaches us all not to be conformed to this world. For if we have known Christ according to the flesh, he says, yet now we have known him no more. Let me read this to you. This is from 1 Corinthians 5. Paul says, therefore from now on we regard no one according to the flesh. Even though we have known Christ according to the flesh, yet now we know him thus, no longer. That's just what Ignatius is saying. That he says, now that Christ is with the Father, he's more visible than he was when he walked the earth in a physical form. Because now the obstruction has been taken away. Now the veil, the big covering over his divinity, has been taken away. We worship Christ in the Spirit, not according to the flesh. Isn't this an amazing passage? Here, I'm going to post this so everybody can read this. No Cathodox likes this passage. Do they know Christ according to the flesh, Michael? Or do they know him according to the Spirit? Are they obsessed with the fleshly appearance of Christ? And do they want to worship the fleshly appearance of Christ? Or do they worship him in the Spirit? Okay, we continue with Eusebius, because he's not done. He says, it is said among the godless heretics that Simon Magus is worshipped in an inanimate material image. Let me read this one more time in case it didn't hit you all the way. It is said among the godless heretics that Simon Magus is worshipped in an inanimate material image. And we ourselves have seen the namesake of madness. That's talking about the heretic Manes, who started the Manichaean sect. He says, we ourselves have seen the namesake of madness being supported by an image among the Manichaeans. But such things are forbidden to us. So guys, they don't make images of their God and bow down to it. Since we confess that the Lord our Savior as God, we prepare ourselves to see God, diligently purifying our own hearts, so that we might see him when we are purified. For blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And he continues, but they nevertheless have embraced again. Okay, now this is a separate quote. That's the end of his letter to Constantia. That should be enough. But we're going to continue because these wicked people dare quote Eusebius in support of images. And we're going to read that very quote that they use in support of images, image veneration and all that, just to show that the very quotes they use destroy them every time. But this is from his book, Church History. This is where he talks about Simon Magus. He says, we understand the author we understood that Simon was the author of all heresy. He says, but they nevertheless have embraced again the superstition of idols, which they seemed to have renounced. Remember, they call themselves Christians. And he's saying they have embraced again the superstitions of idols, which they seem to have renounced, and they fall down before pictures and images of Simon himself and of the above-mentioned Helena who was with him, and they ventured to worship them with incense and sacrifices and libations. All right, Michael? And all you Cathodocs who are listening, what does Eusebius mean that they have embraced again the superstitions of idols, which they seem to have renounced? What does that word mean, again? Because they will always say the same thing. What do they say, Michael? They say, no. The early Christians only bashed images of pagan deities, right? But is that what they really renounce? After everything you've read from Eusebius, does this sound like he only rejects pagan images? No. What does he mean that they have embraced again the superstition of idols? Does he mean, images are fine, venerating images are fine, but it's just the person who's being depicted. That's the wrong thing. Really? Why would he say again? Was Simon Magus being worshipped for hundreds of years in the past? In ancient times? No. Simon Magus was a recent heretic. So what does he mean? They have embraced again the superstition of idols. He can only mean the practice of bowing down to images and burning incense to them. That's what they seem to have renounced. Remember? Which they seem to have renounced? Did they renounce bowing down? Did the worshippers of Simon Magus renounce bowing down to images of Simon Magus before Simon Magus started his sect? Give me a break. No, they renounced bowing down to images and burning incense to them of any kind of image. And now they return to it. So again, the thing that's being bashed is not the person being depicted in the image, but the idea of bowing down to images at all and burning incense to images at all. You get it? Do you agree with me? Am I exaggerating? Am I mistaken? What do you think, Michael? Do you understand? Have I explained it? Is Eusebius? What do you mean sure? Is it a yes or a no? I think this quote is definitely against icons. Great. Great, great, great. Now, certainly you've heard the quotes about Eusebius supposedly endorsing image veneration, right? With the big bronze statue. Well, this is the case. That we wouldn't even have to make a video like this if unless you had a person who is saying we need to bow down to images. So, of course, our whole video needs to be a response to their insanity. You said just keeping the negative, or just keep giving the negative for this segment. I'm trying to isolate your points into shorter videos. Negative points against icons. Well, I mean, it's all connected. I'm not sure how to do that. Okay. So Eusebius is definitely against images. Do you see how many quotes I have from Eusebius against images? Do you see how many I have? There's so many. But I'll just read this more famous one where they talk about this big statue that he mentions. This is a total image bashing quote from Eusebius. He has many more. He says, "For there stands upon an elevated stone by the gates." Oh, well, I'll just mention. He says, "Since I have mentioned this city, I do not think it proper to omit an account which is worthy of record for posterity." So he's talking about out there in Samaria. "For there stands upon an elevated stone by the gates of her house a brazen image of a woman kneeling, with her hands stretched out as if she were praying. Opposite this is another upright image of a man made of the same material, clothed decently in a double cloak, and extending his hand toward the woman. They say, at his feet, beside the statue itself, is a certain strange plant, which climbs up to the hem of the brazen cloak, and is a remedy for all kinds of diseases." So he says the plant it's a medicinal plant. "They say that this statue is an image of Jesus. It has remained to our day, so that we ourselves also saw it when we were staying in the city." Listen to this part. "Nor is it strange that those of the..." Now they translate this word heathen. The actual Greek word is pagan. "Nor is it strange that those of the pagans who of old were benefited by our Savior should have done such a thing." Now, you guys understand the word heathen, that's just the word Gentile. It just means people who are not Jews. Now, pagan is something different. A pagan is those people who are practicing the religions on the fringes of society, the crazy religions that are contrary to Christianity. To call somebody a heathen or to call them a Gentile just means that they're not a Jew, but to call them a pagan is to actually say that they're engaged in superstitious forms of worship. Okay? There's a distinction. Calling them pagans is way worse than calling them Gentiles. So he says, "Nor is it strange that those of the pagans who of old were benefited by our Savior should have done such things." So he's saying it's not surprising that they did this. "The ancients being accustomed, as it is likely, according to the habit of the pagans, to pay this kind of honor indiscriminately to those regarded by them as deliverers." So do you see how he says this honor is paid by them to all kinds of people who they regard as deliverers? Not just Jesus, not just the apostles. He's saying that they have been made of all kinds of people. These are not Christians. He says they make these things indiscriminately because they're pagans, they're superstitious. This is not a Christian practice. He's saying, nor is it strange that those of the pagans would do this. Well, why is it not strange that pagans would do that? Because pagans are idolaters. Any questions? Is this in favor of image veneration? Or is this bashing image veneration? If you call somebody a pagan who makes an image, is that in favor of image veneration? Nor is it surprising that a pagan would do it. Yeah, that sounds very positive toward image veneration, doesn't it? Nice to see you, Alexander. We're just reading some quotes against bowing down to images and burning incense to them.
Oh, yes. Very important.
Yes.
Very important indeed. And fascinating.
Yeah, a lot of lies floating around out there. Oh, we only wish more Catholics were brave enough to meet us and to have this discussion. We will have our chance in the future.
If I can just mention that I think it's the Lord convicting me that I no longer even give much credence to the Shroud of Turin or any image, any supposed likeness of Jesus. I don't need an image of our Savior to worship him with my heart and my soul and my mind.
Amen.
Simple as that.
That
I
is the
don't need to
Christian
see him.
attitude.
Believe in him. He said, "Blessed are those who have not seen me yet believe."
Yes. I want to see him with my spiritual eyes. I want to be pure in heart and see him as he is, not just that earthly, fleshly body. I mean, who even really thinks that to know a person means you just see them? That's not really knowing a person. I see people all the time out there, but just seeing a body doesn't mean I'm in any kind of relationship with them. But to see God is to embrace his law and to conform your life to him, to worship him in the mind, to fully embrace what he has said, and to believe him with your whole heart, and to love him with your whole heart. Then you can see him.
It's a very different form of worship, I dare say, from the pagan world. The Greeks and Romans, they would worship these gods that were not, they worshiped them only to appease them. The Latin phrase, do ut des, I give so that you might give as well. So in exchange, it was not so much a worship as it was maybe a compromise to reap the benefits of these so-called deities. And it was a different type of worship, like a very fleshly, uh, well, I mean, nothing to do with the pure worship of the one true God. Simple as that.
Right on. Okay, Michael, who would you like to go to next? I didn't finish Hillary. I'll just make sure you saw what he said. Just to make sure you heard what he said here. He says it was not the carnal body which he had received from or by birth from the virgin that could manifest to them the image and likeness of God. The human aspect which he wore could be no aid towards the mental vision of the incorporeal God. Other images made of metals or colors or other materials by various arts reproduce the appearance of the objects which they represent, yet can lifeless copies be put on a level with their living originals, painted or carved or molten effigies with the nature which they imitate? The Son is not the image of the Father after such a fashion as this. He is the living image of the living. In other words, if something is not alive, it cannot possibly be the image of God. And again, we have tons and tons and tons and tons of quotes from the fathers talking about what the image of God is. Here it is. Click on this link here if you want to see image of God, what the church fathers say about it. They say the image of God is incorporeal. In you, in a human, it is your soul. In Jesus, it is in his divine essence, which is beyond all description. It's not physical. Again, we continue with Hillary. He says the elements of the world are either lifeless or else they've been given life. But Christ is the life who has been born from the living God into the living God. The elements of the world have been established by God, but they are not God. You understand the elements of the world cannot be God? They think that a physical body is God. They think that an image is God. I mean, if even that body that was nailed to the cross and died was not God, but it was the veil or the covering over God, how much less is an image God? They're like, no, that's God. So God died? They actually, how in debates with Muslims, whether it's Catholic, Orthodox, or Protestant, Muslims always bring this objection. They say, so you believe God died? Your God can die? My God can't die. And what do the Catholics and Orthodox and Protestant apologetics always say? The apologists will say, well, no, 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 no. God didn't die. Jesus was still alive, but his body died. That's what they'll always say. And they know that that body that died and was buried is not divine. That body had to completely change. It became divine when it was transfigured, when it was resurrected. But until then, it was something that needed to die. That flesh needed to be condemned. That flesh was not divine. He took on flesh from us. He took it from Mary and fashioned it as a vessel to live inside of. But flesh is not divine, guys. When they call these icons the divine icons, that is completely absurd. The elements of the world are not God. They are not divine. And yet, what does John of Damascus say? He says, I will not cease from worshiping the matter through which my salvation has been effected. That's a real quote from John of Damascus. I will not cease from worshiping the matter through which my salvation has been effected. Again, John of Damascus says, if the image of the king is the king, the image of Christ is Christ, and the image of a saint is the saint. Wow. The image is Christ? Is that right? Give me a break. Just kill me now. Guys, in the first 300 years of church history, we had to deal with a certain kind of persecution and a certain kind of torture from the Romans where they'd pin you up and stab you and scrape your flesh off. And sometimes I wonder if maybe that wouldn't be as painful as having to hear these ridiculous statements from the Cathodox that an image, a block of wood, is Christ. It is God. You guys are pagans. They're like, no, no, no. The church fathers aren't against all images. They're just against pagans. Yeah, they are against you pagans. They sure are. They are against you pagans. Let's continue reading. Our dear Hilary of Poitiers, who does understand the doctrine of the Trinity perfectly. Is my audio cutting in and out? Everybody else understand me okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, I understand you. Just but periodically, just for a little bit, it cuts out. Just letting you know.
Okay. Just let me know, guys, if it's bad. Okay. We continue with Hilary. He says, certainly he whose substance is visible would not reproduce the image of an invisible nature. So he's saying, the way you know that the Father's substance is not visible is because of the invisible nature of God. Remember, it says he is the image of the invisible God. Hopefully you already understand that, guys. We'll continue with Hilary. He says, there is no danger of the one faith not being the one faith because it teaches many things. The evangelist had reported that the Lord had said, he who has seen me has seen also the Father. But has Paul, the teacher of the Gentiles, been unaware of or silent about the meaning of these words when he said, who is the image of the invisible God? I ask whether there is a visible image of the invisible God, and whether the infinite God can be brought together in an image so that he is visible through the image of a limited form. Wow, I should have lit this up in the pink. Whenever I make it purple like this, guys, that means it's like a killer quote. I really need to do that. He says, an image must express the form of him whose image it is. Let those who wish the Son to have a different kind of nature decide upon what kind of an image they wish the Son to be of the invisible Father. Do they desire it to be bodily and visible, one that wanders from place to place by its movement and walking? Let them bear in mind that Christ is a spirit, and God is a spirit, according to the Gospels and the prophets. And if they will circumscribe this spirit, Christ, within the bounds of that which may be formed and is corporeal, then the incarnate one will not be the image of the invisible God, and a finite limitation will not be the form of him who is infinite. Wow, what a quote. I have to highlight this. What a quote. I love this part here. I ask whether there is a visible image of the invisible God, and whether the infinite God can be brought together in an image so that he is visible through the image of a limited form. Wow. And of course he's saying no. His answer to that question is no. That is not possible. Jesus is not the image of God in that sense. To be the image of God means to be the duplicate of God in a totally spiritual sense, not a visual, physical sense. Because God doesn't have a visual, physical body. I can't believe we have to explain to that people who are supposedly... We have to explain that to people who claim to be the original church. They don't know the basics of our faith. Christ took on a body. He took on flesh from us as humiliation. That wasn't some kind of privilege to him. Have you guys ever heard the Cathodox say that God owes Mary because she gave him her flesh? Like, yeah, God owes a debt to Mary. How crazy. I know the Catholics especially say that. Guys, how can God owe a debt to Mary when it was humiliating for him to take flesh from her? That wasn't a privilege. He lowered himself down to our level. No, she owes him. That is only a privilege for her. That's not some kind of privilege for God. Man, just incredible how perverse they are. We continue with Hilary. He says, neither has the Lord left anything uncertain. He who has seen me has seen also the Father. Nor has the apostle been silent about the nature of him who is the image of the invisible God. The Lord has declared, if I do not perform the works of my Father, do not believe me. Hence he teaches that the Father is seen in him because he performs his works, so that the word of the nature that was perceived would reveal the nature of the power that was perceived. Wherefore the apostle, indicating that this is the image of God, says, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creation, for in him were created all the things in the heavens and the earth, those things visible and things invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. So he's saying that's the actual image of God. It's his power. It's his power to create. That's the true image of God, according to Hilary here, and he's saying that that's what Paul is saying. Now listen to this last part. Hilary says, accordingly, he is the image of God by the power of these works. Certainly, the creator of invisible things is not compelled by any necessity of nature to be the visible image of the invisible God, in order that we might not regard him as the image of the form rather than of the nature. He is therefore the image of the invisible God, because by the power of his nature we are to understand that in him there is not an invisible attribute, but the nature of God. The very nature of God. He says, and lest it be imagined that the bodily appearance was by itself a reflection of the image of the Father's appearance, he added, believe me that I am in the Father and the Father in me. Otherwise, believe because of the works themselves. Does this all make sense, guys? That physical image is not, the physical body of Jesus is not the image of God. The Catholics are completely ignorant about that. Hilary says, every image is similar in species to that of which it is an image. And he who is an image, if he is to be truly an image, must have in himself his original's species, nature, and essence, in virtue of the fact that he is an image. So guys, do blocks of wood and stone share the same essence as Jesus? No. Therefore, they are not the true image of Jesus. Do you understand that there's a difference between being an image and being made in the image? Something can be made in the image, and another thing can just be the image. Jesus is not made in the image of God. He is the image of God. He's the actual literal image in a spiritual manner, a duplicate of God the Father. Whereas Adam is a created being. He is made in the image. But even Adam in his essence is something, his soul is something spiritual. Okay, let that suffice. What would you say? Would you say, Michael, that Hilary seems to think that making physical images of God will help you in seeing Jesus, and that that's something we as Christians should do? You want to go to John Chrysostom after this? Not only does he not mention something, but he says that Jesus' body is not, his physical form, his servile form, is not any aid. The human aspect which he wore could be no aid towards the mental vision of the incorporeal God. Does that completely contradict what the Catholics say? Do they believe that we see God by looking at physical images? Didn't you just hear Peter here saying that? He says, this is what you're going to be seeing for eternity. Remember he said that? Are we going to be seeing Jesus' fleshly face for eternity? Is that true? Or is that a lie? We're not going to be seeing a physical face of Jesus. We're going to see him as he is, like John says. Yes. Okay, good. You get the point. Then let's go on to another quote. You want John Chrysostom. I'd love to do Augustine. Augustine absolutely tears images apart. Why don't we do Augustine first, and let's go to John Chrysostom right after Augustine. I mean, I don't really care, actually. Let's do John Chrysostom. It's fine. Here we go. Okay, now before I read these quotes, we start out with a quote from John Chrysostom bashing the idea of venerating the bodies of saints. And he's talking about how dangerous it would be if God were to make it so that bodies don't decay. He says people already worship the bodies of people whose bodies do decay. And he's saying how much more would people worship a body that didn't decay? And he says for that reason it's very good, it's very important that God made it so that our earthly bodies decay, they get all rotten, and they turn into just bones. He says that's good because it discourages people from worshiping bodies. Now, he says something quite astonishing in the midst of this. He says, but, says one, this is a person he would be hypothetically debating, but, says one, this ought to take place, meaning them, moving on and dying. This ought to take place without the decay of our bodies. They should continue entire. And John Chrysostom says, And what would this have advantaged either the living or the departed? How long are you lovers of the body? How long are you riveted to the earth and gaping after shadows? Why what good would this have done? Or rather, what harm would it have not done? For did our bodies not decay, in the first place, the greatest of all evils, pride, would have continued with many. For if, even while this is going on, and worms gushing out, many have earnestly sought to be gods, what would not have been the result, if the body continued without decaying, he means. He says, in the second place, it would not be believed to be of the earth if it didn't decay. For if its end witnessing this, some yet doubt, what would they not have suspected if they did not see this? Here's the next part. He says, thirdly, this is the third reason why it's important for bodies to decay, why God did that. Thirdly, the bodies would have been excessively loved, and most men would have become more carnal and gross. And if even now some cleave to men's tombs and coffins, after that themselves have perished, what would they not have done if they had even their image preserved? He's talking about image veneration here. He's saying they would have gone crazy worshiping images. Now, guys, we know, we are well aware, we are not ignorant, that in the 300s and the 400s, it started to become much more common for pictures of Jesus and the saints to be drawn. And this was discouraged a lot. They discouraged this very much because people tend to naturally bow down to images, especially really beautiful images put up on a big pedestal or drawn as a huge mural on this massive wall on this beautiful cathedral, which John Chrysostom had. Now, John Chrysostom does not say that there are any images in his church, but he does say that in people's houses they have drawn pictures of saints who have died. And he says, you guys are showing your love when you do this. This is wonderful how much you loved the saints who died. But on the other hand, John Chrysostom warns against actually bowing down to or loving pictures. He says you should not love the bodies. And he says, let me read this again. Let's read it. He says, thirdly, the bodies would have been excessively loved, and most men would have become more carnal and gross. And if even now some cleave to men's tombs and coffins, after they themselves have perished, what would they not have done if they had even their image preserved? In other words, he's saying they would have venerated them. And by the way, the Catholics love that word venerate. Boy, do they love it. Let's not use that word venerate. That's an ambiguous word. Let's just use the actual definition here, the Greek word proskuneo. It just means bow. Venerate is the Latin version of this Greek word proskuneo. Let's just, be accurate here. We're talking about bowing. Venerate is so ambiguous. They love ambiguous terms. You guys need to call them on that and say, I'm not using your ambiguous term. I know what you're talking about. You're talking about bowing down. God says you shall neither bow down nor serve them. So the word for bow down is proskuneo, and the other word for serve, spiritual service, is latria. You shall neither bow down nor serve. And the service God is talking about is doing sacrifices and burning incense. Guess what? The Catholics do both. They make sure not to omit a single sin that God has forbidden. They make sure they bow down to images and burn incense to them. They perform proskynesis, and they are engaged in latreo, spiritual service. But John Chrysostom isn't done. He gives more reasons for why it's a good thing that these bodies decay. He says, sixthly, they would not have known the excellence of the soul. He's saying if these bodies hadn't decayed, if the bodies had remained entire, well, the people would not have known the excellence of the soul, and how great a thing is the presence of a soul in a body. You see, guys, if you're not allowed to venerate the body of a saint, how much more are you not allowed to bow down to a picture of a saint? Do you understand the logic here? If you're not allowed to bow down to the body, why would you be allowed to bow down to just a picture of the body? At least the body was alive at one time when it had a soul in it. But a picture that you drew never had a soul in it. It was never alive. You get it? And he continues, seventhly, many of them that lose their relations would have left their cities and have dwelt in the tombs and have become frantic, conversing continually with their own dead. Sounds like the Catholics. You know how they love the tombs? They love to go to the tombs and talk to the dead. For if even now men form to themselves images, since they cannot keep the body, for neither is it possible, But whether they will or not, it glides and hurries from them. And if people are riveted to planks of wood, what monstrous thing would they not then have devised? To my thinking, the generality, he just means the general populace, would have even built temples for such bodies, and they that are skilled in such sorceries would have persuaded evil spirits to speak through them. Guys, did you know that Catholics and Orthodox build temples for the saints? This is forbidden by the church. It's forbidden even in the 300s and 400s. They forbade it. You don't build a temple in honor of a saint. He says, to my thinking, this is what would have happened. He says this horrible thing would have happened. The general population would have even built temples for such bodies. Yeah, there you go. He says, since, at least even now, they that venture on the arts of necromancy attempt many things more out of the way than these. He's saying they've done even crazier things than that. So they definitely would have done this. And how many idolatries would not have arisen from hence, when men, even after dust and ashes, are yet eager in those practices? God, therefore, to take away all our extravagances and to teach us to stand off from all earthly things, destroys the bodies before our eyes. But if bodies did not decay, this would not be well known. But as evil spirits run into men's graves, so also many of our lovers, continually sitting by the tombs, would have received evil spirits in their soul, and would quickly have perished in this grievous madness. By the way, guys, did you know the Catholics and Orthodox teach a doctrine called incorruptible saints? They teach the idea that the bodies of the saints continue incorrupt and don't decay, but that they are miraculously preserved. Are you aware of that, Michael? The incorruptible saints? Surely you've heard of this. It's one of their favorite talking points. Farewell, Alexander. It's good talking to you. God be with you. So, Michael, do you think the idea of incorruptible saints is consistent and it agrees with what John Chrysostom is teaching here? Does John Chrysostom think that there are any incorruptible saints? And does he think that would be a good thing if the bodies remained uncorrupt? God be with you, Alexander. Hope to talk to you again soon. Michael is typing. Give you a second to respond, Michael. I would just say it is very obvious. You guys ever seen the so-called incorruptible saints? They are such superstitious fools. And by the way, we have a section on the website. Here, I'll link it to you. It's called Burial and Funeral Practices of Christians. Here you go. Michael, you don't think this is addressing relics? The relics of the saints are their body parts. How is this not addressing relics? They have a doctrine called the incorruptible saints that says the saints' bodies do not decay. First you said, yes, that's what it's referring to. Then you said you don't think this is specifically addressing relics. It is. He's saying God does not allow bodies to remain on and not decay. He's saying they have to. Or else people will worship them.
I've seen the Catholics do this, but the Orthodox do this too.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're both obsessed. Look up Orthodox incorruptible saints. Do you guys know my friend Jacob, when he was becoming Orthodox and I was trying to talk him out of it, I don't know, like 12 years ago, when I was 17 years old, one of the main things he brought up to me, he said, Luke, the Orthodox Church has the incorruptible saints. My priest was showing me. This is amazing, he was saying. They've got miracles. They've got saints' bodies that don't decay. And I said, wow, have you seen any pictures of them? He said, well, no, but they've told me about it. I said, well, let's Google it. Let's find some pictures of these incorruptible saints. So we go online, and he looks at them, and he goes, oh, it actually doesn't look that good, does it? The bodies do look maybe a little bit corrupted. Maybe they look like total dead corpses that have been dead for hundreds of years. They call that an incorruptible body. And then they change it and they'll be like, well, it just took longer to decay than others. Yeah, guys, Orthodox Church is crazy about incorruptible saints, just as much as the Catholics. They're like, it just took a little longer. It just took a little longer. You want to talk about the relics,
And
though? Yeah, it's absolutely wicked and disgusting. These people are just so evil. By the way, we've just started these articles. If you guys want to read these articles sometimes, but this obsession with the exposing bodies. You understand the sin that's being committed here. The reason why we made this article is because it is a sin to leave a body unburied. They say we're going to honor the saints. And how do they honor the saints? By taking their bodies and putting them on display in boxes. You should read what the church fathers say about this. This is a sin. I know, Michael, that you may think I'm going off the rails here and not staying on the subject, but let me just read a few comments, just a few church fathers on the subject. Here's Athanasius quoting Anthony the Great. Here's what Anthony the Great says. He says, but when the brethren, well, this is Athanasius talking. He says, but when the brethren were urging Anthony to abide with them and there to die, he suffered it not for many other reasons, as he showed by keeping silence, and especially for this reason. Anthony said, the Egyptians are prone to honor with funeral rites and to wrap in linen cloths at death the bodies of good men, and especially of the holy martyrs, and not to bury them underground, but to place them on couches and to keep them in their houses, thinking in this to honor the departed. And Anthony often urged the bishops to keep commandment or to give commandment to the people on this matter. In like manner he taught the laity and reproved the women, saying that this thing was neither lawful nor holy at all. And thus saying, he showed that he who did not bury the bodies of the dead after death transgressed the law. What am I looking at here? Why are there so many unburied bodies put on display in glass cases? This is breaking the law. You are not allowed to do this, you Cathodocs. This is desecrating their bodies. Your version of honoring saints is actually insulting them. You've got everything reversed. If you love these people, you will bury their bodies. It is unlawful to expose them. By the way, we have many other quotes from the Church Fathers. John Chrysostom and others saying that this is a sin. Augustine and all the early Church Fathers all saying this. It is a sin. It is unlawful. It is a great insult. And you will incur a great punishment for not burying the bodies of the saints, but leaving them exposed. Look at what they did to poor John Chrysostom, guys. John Chrysostom tells him, bury me. And what do? They put his head on display. They put his ear on display. Look at the title of this article, The Incorrupt Ear of John Chrysostom. I don't know why they are so deluded. Look at that ear, guys. Look, it's incorrupt. They're like, but it's miraculously preserved. It should have been eaten away by bugs by now. They claim to have his ear, guys. They put it on display in a box with a hole on the side. And they think that is honoring to John Chrysostom. Sorry, guys, it's not honoring. You got such a punishment coming to you. I just saved a couple here on the website, but there are so many. We have to make a huge list, and it will have hundreds of entries because they do this with hundreds of their so-called saints. Some of them are really not saints at all. Some of them are really wicked people. Anyway, I mean, is this not absolutely horrific? This is Saint Spiridon. The Orthodox Church put him on display. This is sick. You put him on display. Bury the guy. Good grief. Okay, we continue. We're going to read some more quotes about image veneration. This is what John Chrysostom is bashing, Michael, whether you accept it or not, whether you're in denial or not. He is absolutely bashing the idea of being lovers of the body. Did you not read this, Michael? How long are you lovers of the body? How long are you riveted to the earth and gaping after shadows? He's saying the body is a shadow. That's not the actual person. The soul is the person. If you want to honor the person, go deposit their earthly body under the earth and leave it there. All right, but I can already see, Michael, you're stubborn. Being stubborn. Let's continue with John Chrysostom. He absolutely is bashing. He's totally refuting and teaching that this is not a doctrine of the church, the idea of the incorruptible saints. He's saying all the bodies must decay. Not only do they decay, but it is a necessity that they decay, or else people will do what the Cathodocs do to those bodies. Okay, and he continues. Now, I gave you the context. Do you notice how with quotes, I give you a great big context so that nobody can say we are taking John Chrysostom out of context. So this is a huge section, his commentary on John chapter 12. Here's a huge section. I'm just going to read the parts I highlighted. He's talking about idolatry. He says, therefore has Paul called idolatry, calling greed idolatry. He says, and why calls he it idolatry? Many possess wealth and dare not use it, but consecrate it, handing it down untouched, not daring to touch it, as though it were some dedicated thing. And if at any time they're forced to do so, they feel as though they had done something unlawful. He's saying they just love their wealth so much. Besides, as the Greek carefully tends his graven image, so you entrust your gold to doors and bars, providing a chest instead of a shrine. So he's saying some of the Christians, he's saying, are actually idolaters because of the fact that although they don't have a graven image like a Greek, he says while the Greek carefully tends his graven image, you put your gold on doors and bars, and you provide a chest full of gold instead of a shrine of gold. You see, he's saying the Greeks have their version of idolatry, and some of you people in the church have your own version of idolatry because you love these physical objects. Did you guys know that the love of things and gold is idolatry? Paul just sums it up with the word greed. So he says, while that Greek loves, he carefully tends his graven image. By the way, that means the Christians don't have graven images. He says, you entrust your gold to doors and bars, providing a chest instead of a shrine, and laying it up in silver vessels. But you do not bow down to it. He says, but you do not bow down to it, as the Greek does to his image? He says, well, nevertheless, you show all kinds of attention to it. Wow, what a statement. He says, oh, so you don't bow down to an image like a Greek? Well, nevertheless, you're still an idolater because you love your gold so much. But have you noticed something, guys? The Catholics and Orthodox are worse than the person John Chrysostom is rebuking here. Because the Catholics and Orthodox do take their gold and put it on graven images and bow to it. They're doing even more sins than John Chrysostom is condemning here. He says you're an idolater if you just take gold and lay it up somewhere and love it. He's saying even if you don't have an image, even if you don't put gold on an image, you're still an idolater. But you guys do have gold, you do put it on your images, and then you even bow down to your golden images and say that this honors God. God wants to be honored with money. Take all your money, get these expensive images, all this expensive wood carving and all this expensive painting and all this huge paintings on walls, and that's how you honor God. What delusion. By the way, this statement absolutely obliterates the Catholics because he is indicating they do not bow down to images. But he continues, again, he would rather give up his eyes or his life than his graven image. He's talking about the Greek, but he's also talking about the Catholics, isn't he? Again, he would rather give up his eyes or his life than his graven image. So also with those who love gold. But, says one, I worship not the gold. Neither does he says, worship the image, but the devil that dwells in it. But you guys actually do worship the images, you Catholics. So you're actually worse than the person that John Chrysostom is refuting here. He's saying that they're in trouble just for loving gold so much, but you take the gold and put it on images like a pagan. You're worse. He says, and in like manner, you, though you worship not the gold, yet you worship that devil who springs on your soul from the sight of the gold, and you lust for it. For more grievous than an evil spirit is the lust of money-loving, and many obey it more than others do idols. For these last in many things disobey, but in this case they yield everything, and whatever it tells them to do, they obey. But there was no gold at the beginning, and no man desired gold. He's talking about in the ancient times, before all this gold appeared on the scene, back in Adam and Eve's day. And he continues, same chapter. He says, how much wrath, tell me, how much expense, how many enmities these men incurred, meaning how much did they bring upon themselves, and what the gain? What was their gain? He says, deathless punishment, and the having no consolation, and the being not only while alive, but when gone, accused by all. What? When we see the images of the many laid up in their houses, shall we not weep the more? Of a truth well said the prophet, verily every man living disquiets himself in vain. For anxiety about such things is indeed disquiet and superfluous trouble. So he's saying, you see these people lay up images in their houses. And he says, when we see this, do we not weep the more? When people have golden images and things like this, that they leave this behind. They've wasted all this money on this nonsense. See, the Catholics will point to quotes from John Chrysostom where he says that some of the Christians were so sad when one of their bishops died that they drew pictures of him in some of their houses. He doesn't say how many houses, but some people had drawn a picture of him in their house to remember him. And John Chrysostom, John Chrysostom says that is so sweet that they missed their bishop so much that they drew pictures. But John Chrysostom still elsewhere tells you that to actually be a lover of images is very superstitious. And that's even without expending all this gold on it, all this money on it. And that's even without bowing down to it and then burning incense to it and saying, this is the holy icon. I worship God through physical pictures. You see how the Catholics, have gotten so much worse than even the things John Chrysostom would bash, would criticize. All right, that's the end of the section I took from his commentary on John. Here's another commentary. This is his homily 6 on Romans. He's going to talk about idolatry again, and he's going to compare the Greek with the Christian. And he's going to convict the Christian who acts like the Greek pagan, I mean. He says, for tell me, what have you to say to the Greek? If you plunder and be covetous, will you say, forsake idolatry, acknowledge God, and draw near not to gold and silver? Will he then not make a jest of you and say, talk to yourself first in this way? For it is not the same thing for a Gentile to practice idolatry, and a Christian to commit this same sin. For how are we to draw others away from idolatry if we draw not ourselves away from this? Okay, so what is the idolatry? He says, now do not tell me that you do not worship an image of gold, but make this clear to me, that you do not do those things which gold bids you. Wow, what a statement. He says, listen, you Christian, don't even bring up the fact that you don't bow down to images of gold. He says, don't bring that up. That doesn't matter to me. I know you don't bow down to images of gold like a pagan. He says, but what I do want you to tell me, what I do want you to make clear to me, is that you're not a servant of gold. Because he says, John Chrysostom is saying, even if you don't bow down to images of gold, you're still a servant of the gold if you love it, if you're a lover of money. But guys, why is this an amazing quote? Because the Catholics and Orthodox do worship images of gold. They're even worse. If John Chrysostom says you're not exempt from the charge of idolatry, even if you don't have images of gold, you are still an idolater if you love money, if you love gold. How much more are you condemned if you actually do have images of gold? By the way, the Catholics make a killing, literally and figuratively, off of selling their icons. They're expensive. They cost a pretty penny. They've got a business going selling these icons and selling all their little superstitious amulets, all their little trinkets, their candles, and all their little things that you put on your altar and around your house, all these little good luck charms. Yeah, yes, he says, now do not tell me. Don't tell me that you don't worship an image of gold. Make this clear to me, that you do not do those things which gold bids you. For there be different kinds of idolatry, and one holds mammon his lord, and another his belly his god, and a third some other more baneful lust. But you do not sacrifice oxen to them as the Gentiles do? No, but what is far worse, you butcher your own soul. But you do not bow the knee in worship. Nay, but the greater obedience you do all. Nay, but with greater obedience you do all that they command you, whether it be your belly or money or the tyranny of lust. Do you notice how he puts emphasis on not bowing to these things? He's like, yeah, well, you may not physically bow, which would be a huge sin, but he says you're still showing them obedience. You're still a slave to these things. But the Catholics actually do bow the knee to images. You understand, if John Chrysostom knew that they were literally bowing down to images of gold, then he wouldn't say this. He wouldn't say, oh, you don't bow down, but you are still a slave to them. He'd say, what? You're actually bowing down to images? You're actually calling yourself icon-adools, icon slaves? What? It's incredible. Okay, let me see if there are any comments here. No comments. All right, we'll continue. You guys have any questions so far? Michael, what do you think about this? What do you think about the fact that John Chrysostom puts emphasis on the fact that we Christians do not bow down to images of gold? Do you think he would say that if they were bowing down to images, Christian golden images? Is he just forgetting to mention that Christians do bow down to golden images as long as they're of Jesus? Does John Chrysostom seem like the kind of man to bow down to human bodies? Reading these beginning quotes here, does he seem to be a fan of the idea of being lovers of a body and being riveted to the earth, cleaving to men's tombs and coffins, conversing continually with their own dead? Does he seem to be a fan of that? Yes, it does seem unlikely that they're bowing down to images. He continues, "How long shall we love riches? For I shall not cease exclaiming against them, for they are the cause of everything." He's talking about of all sins. "For how long do we not get our fill of this insatiable desire? What is the good of gold? I am astonished at the thing. There is some enchantment in the business, that gold and silver should be so highly valued among us. For our own souls, indeed, we have no regard, but those lifeless images engross much attention." Wow. Lifeless images. People like to make images and put gold around them. Now, he doesn't indicate that any Christian is doing this in worship. He says pagan Greeks are doing that. And he says people who have passed away, that people go and look at the images in their homes of what they looked like before they died, and that they have gold. Rich people put gold all around images of themselves and of their family members. He doesn't say any of this is being used in Christian worship. But still, look at how he bashes it. "For our own souls, indeed, we have no regard, but those lifeless images engross much attention." Yeah, he does not like the idea of spending money on golden images. He doesn't make an exception. None of them do. God doesn't want to be honored that way. He is not honored. He can't be honored that way. It makes him furious to see people wasting money on such things. People who are incapable of worshiping in spirit. And he continues in another quote. This is a separate section now, his commentary on Philippians. He says, "For it was on this account that goods have their name from use. Not that we should use them thus like goldsmith samples, but that we should do some good therewith. So then, when love of gold does not allow this, is not the whole thing loss? For he that dares not use them forbears the use as if they were another's property, and there's no use of them in any way." So he's saying just having gold sit around is useless. You should use it. Go use it for something useful and do something righteous with it. Perform a good work. Do some almsgiving. But he continues. He says again, "How is it when we erect splendid and spacious mansions, decorated with columns, marbles, porticos, arcades, and in every way possible, setting images and statues everywhere? Many indeed even called demons out of these," i.e. the images. By the way, the Catholics added this. "But let us omit the examination of those points. What too is the meaning of the gilded ceiling? Does it not supply the same need as to him whose house is on a moderate scale? Oh, but there is great delight in it," he says. "Yes, for the first or second day, and afterwards none at all, but it stands merely for nothing. For if the sun does not strike us with wonder from its being customary, much more do works of art fail, and we only look at them like things of clay." Wow, works of art fail? And they're just things of clay? So he's bashing the idea of setting images and statues everywhere, and especially wasting money on these things. Does this sound like something they were doing in the church? Do you think he would say this if he was already engaged in the practice of setting images everywhere? And he responds to the person who says, "Oh, but there is great delight in it." He says, "That is such a stupid thing to say." He says, even the sun in the sky, the most magnificent thing in all of God's creation, an absolutely astounding thing, the sun in the sky. He says, even that, people get bored of looking at it. So why are you making images? You know that it just becomes boring in the end. Much more do works of art fail, and we only look at them like things of clay. That's his opinion about works of art. See, some people, if I were to show this to somebody and say, hey, here's a quote from Clement of Alexandria. What do you think about this quote from Clement of Alexandria? They say, oh, Clement of Alexandria was an idiot. He just hates works of art. You remember when he says that works of art cannot then be holy or sacred? Now, let me show you. Works of art. Here is Clement of Alexandria. He says, works of art cannot then be sacred and divine. See, if I were to say that was Clement of Alexandria, they would say, oh, he's an idiot. He's an iconoclast, and he was just ignorant of things. And then if I switch it and say, actually, that was John Chrysostom, they'd say, oh, what? Oh, well, he was mistaken. And the saints sometimes make mistakes. They make mistakes. I thought you were just trying to convince me that John Chrysostom was worshiping images.
Hey, Luke.
Yeah.
I was thinking, like, who is the one that mentioned the signet rings, where they said, "Let it have, like a dove
Yes,
to
Clement of
remind you of the
Alexandria.
Holy Spirit." That was Clement of
Mm-hmm.
Alexandria. Yeah, I mean, don't you? I was going to say, don't you think that if it was that important that you needed help by praying to the dead through some venerated icon image, don't you think that would have been mentioned by the early church at the very beginning?
Absolutely. They talk about so many things. They talk about the most minute details of doctrine. Absolutely. If they were doing that, they would have talked about it. But by the way, they're so desperate that they even have to rely on men like Clement of Alexandria, who they know say that works of art cannot be sacred or divine, that we don't bow down to images of any kind. They have to rely on him for evidence of image veneration. That's how sad this is. Because if I were to bring up Clement of Alexandria, they say, oh, he's an idiot. He doesn't know anything. He totally contradicts what we believe. But then to the ignorant, they will bring forward that very section you're talking about, where he says, when you're making signet rings, we Christians should not be extravagant with our rings. We should make some Christian symbol of some time. Well, guess what, Cathodox? This proves that the early church, even the ones who were very stringent and absolutely abhorred all veneration of images, even they had nothing against decorations. They had nothing against decorations. But bowing down to images and saying, oh, we worship God through images, through sacred, divine, holy images, that was something they all totally repudiated. You see, these two things are not mutually exclusive. Hating image veneration, refusing to bow down to images, is not mutually exclusive from having decorations. You can have decorations and also hate images. But all they can point to is that some Christians had decorations to try to prove that people are actually bowing down to those images. They lose. They lose, because even Clement of Alexandria and Tertullian will say there's nothing wrong with decorations. However, it depends on where the decorations are, too. Having decorations in your home, like John Chrysostom says, some people drew some pictures of some saints who had died. That's one thing. But actually drawing a big picture in the place where you meet together as a church, that is very dangerous. That's why at Elvira, they said, pictures are not to be placed in churches so that they do not become objects of worship and adoration. Or, as some alternate translations say, there shall be no pictures in churches, lest what is worshipped be depicted on walls. See, guys, they're worried that the divinity who is worshipped in spirit and in truth is going to end up being worshipped on walls. People are going to be bowing down to the wall and saying, this wall has my God on it, and I'm going to worship God by bowing to this wall. The problem is about the worship, and that's why they didn't put pictures in their meeting places, because the people would start to say, oh, this is our holy temple with the holy image. And now you're not really worshiping God, you're worshiping your works of art. It's very simple. Do you see how simple this is, Michael? This is not a complicated doctrine. This is a very simple doctrine. We worship our God in spirit and truth. Why do we worship him in spirit? Well, Jesus says, God is a spirit, and those who wish to worship God must worship in spirit and truth. That means if God is a spirit, if he's not a physical, corporeal being, then the way you worship him must not be physical and corporeal. You worship him in the mind. God looks at your heart. There is no object you could offer to God and say, here, God, I offer you this object. And God could feel worshipped by that. Instead, he looks at your heart. He sees that you renounce physical possessions. He sees that you renounce worldly goods. And as you draw yourself away from the things of the world, he is worshipped. Isn't that an amazing contrast? As you give up your possessions to the poor, and as you have love in your heart for others, That is worship. That's how he wants to be worshipped. He hates this fake worship that people are doing. I've read enough quotes from John Chrysostom, but I'll keep going because he's still got some really good ones. I love this one. He says, "Don't tell me that you do not worship an image of gold, but rather make this clear to me, that you don't do what gold bids you." And yet they actually do bow down to images of gold. Incredible. So he says, these foolish people are setting images and statues everywhere. He says, much more do works of art fail, and we only look at them like things of clay. And then he bashes people who make these complicated, beautiful buildings and spend tons of money on them. John Chrysostom did not approve of that. Neither did others like Ambrose of Milan. They really bashed the idea of spending a bunch of money on these buildings. John Chrysostom has this whole section on gold, which we should make a whole video about. All the church fathers before and after Nicaea talking about gold and saying, if all the people in the world who were hungry were filled and taken care of, then you can do what you want with gold. But as long as you have slaves being sold on the slave market, and hungry people, and sick people, and homeless people who need houses, you will be condemned if you have gold sitting around anywhere in these churches. You'll be condemned on Judgment Day. John Chrysostom teaches that. Ambrose teaches that. They say this is not honoring God to just have these golden vessels sitting around doing nothing. God is so angry. In fact, shall I read that? Here, I'll read this part from Chrysostom, and then I'll read that section to you. Because, the Catholics and Orthodox think God is honored by setting up gold vessels and plastering the walls with gold. As if God's just, he sees the shine. Like you can trick God. Look, God, don't look at my evil heart. Don't look at my evil denomination that loves war and, divorce and remarriage, which is adultery and is, idolatrous and blasphemous. Just look at the gold, God. See, I can trick you. I can put you in a trance. You like the sparkle of that gold? They really think God is stupid. They think he's like a little baby that's entranced by some sparkling goo goo gaga something. I mean, they really think God's an infant that can be tricked that way. Gold just symbolizes purity. I mean, gold symbolizes these things that are glorious, like the sun, but it isn't actually glorious. It's just symbolic. Anyway, we continue with Chrysostom. He says, "For tell me, what does a range of pillars contribute to make your dwelling superior to others? Or the finest statues, or the gilding spread over the wall? Nothing. Rather, these come of luxury and insolence, and overweening pride and folly. For everything there ought to be necessary. For everything there ought to be necessary and useful, not superfluous things. Do you see that the thing is loss? Do you see that it is superfluous and unprofitable? For if it supplies no further use or delight, and it does in the course of time bring satiety,
Satiety.
which means the feeling or state of being sated, meaning satisfied, it is nothing else than loss, and vainglory is the hindrance which will not let us see this." So he's bashing people who waste money making these beautiful dwellings. Guys, they bash it just as much with the church buildings as they do with people's personal dwellings. Let me prove this to you, because some people are going to say, "Oh, come on, the church fathers, they loved those beautiful buildings that were gifted to them by the emperors." No, they didn't. The more spiritual of them said, this is really bad that these emperors are giving us these big golden plastered buildings. You know what Ambrose of Milan did? You know what Ambrose of Milan did? I'm going to read you what he did. He went and melted down all the gold in the church. This is a story from one of his letters. Which letter is this? This is Ambrose. He talks about what he did and he wrote this to his clergy. His clergy were upset because they found out that Ambrose had gone and melted down all of the gold vessels in the church. And they weren't sure why he had done it, because some of them thought, oh, has Ambrose just went and appropriated all this wealth for himself that was gifted to us by the emperor? And Ambrose writes this in response. He tells them what he did. He says, "It was far better to preserve souls than gold for the Lord. For he who sent the apostles without gold also brought together the churches without gold. The church has gold, not to store up, but to lay out, and to spend on those who need. Is it not much better that the priest should melt it down for the sustenance of the poor? Would not the Lord himself say, Why did you suffer so many needy to die of hunger? Surely you had gold. You should have given them sustenance. Why are so many captives brought on the slave market, and why are so many unredeemed left to be slain by the enemy? Did you guys know that sometimes people would be kidnapped, and then the kidnappers would send out a letter that says, hey, this is the ransom if you want to free this person? And sometimes hostages would just be executed because people couldn't pay the ransom. And he's bringing that up. He's saying, how many and why are so many unredeemed left to be slain by the enemy? So when you actually are bought with the ransom money, that's called being redeemed. He says, it had been better to preserve living vessels than gold ones. To this, no answer could be given. So he's saying they demanded an answer from Ambrose. He says, to this, no answer could be given. For what would you say? I feared that the temple of God, I feared that the temple of God would need its ornaments. He would answer, the sacraments need not gold, nor are they proper to gold only, for they are not bought with gold. The glory of the sacraments. So, you guys, you got to understand, he melted down the golden vessels, the plates and the bowls and the cups that they would serve the Eucharist in. He melted them all down. He says, the glory of the sacraments is the redemption of captives. So, guys, do you know what he did? There was a slave market right outside of the church. They were selling people right outside of his church in Milan, and Ambrose went and melted down all the gold and bought every single slave in the market and gave them all their freedom. That's what he's responding to here. And that's why these clergy are upset at Ambrose. They're going, where did all the golden vessels go? He says, what would you say? For what would you say? I feared that the temple of God would need its ornaments. He would answer, God would answer, the sacraments need not gold, nor are they proper to gold only, for they are not bought with gold. The glory of the sacraments is the redemption of captives. He's saying, guys, we were redeemed by Christ, and we're given this through the sacraments, through baptism and the Eucharist. And he says, truly they are precious vessels, for they redeem men from death. You see how ironic he's being? That indeed is the true treasure of the Lord, which effects what his blood effected. Then indeed is the vessel of the Lord's blood recognized, when one sees in either redemption, so that the chalice redeems from the enemy those whom his blood redeemed from sin. So he's saying, yeah, you're right, these vessels are very holy. He's like, they are very holy. Look how holy they are now. They were just used to redeem souls, just like Christ's body and blood did redeem us. Isn't that great, guys? Isn't this a great response from Ambrose? He says, how beautifully it is said, when long lines of captives are redeemed by the church, these Christ has redeemed. Behold the gold that can be tried. Behold the useful gold. Behold the gold of Christ, which frees from death. These, then, I preferred to hand over to you as free men rather than to store up the gold. This crowd of captives, this company surely is more glorious than the sight of cups. Great response from Ambrose. And that's the Christian attitude right there. We do not lay up gold in churches. After all the captives have been set free, after all the poor and all the naked and all the hungry have been taken care of, then you can start storing up your gold if you're that carnal and foolish. But you are not allowed to do that up until then. Make sense, Michael? And everybody else listening? That was Ambrose. And you can see Ambrose has the same spirit as John Chrysostom. You think John Chrysostom would say something different than that? They are in complete agreement on this. There's much to say there. Many quotes from the fathers on the subject of storing up gold and how much God is honored by gold. God couldn't care less. Maybe I have some quotes from Chrysostom. This is very disorganized. Here, I'll read you some quotes from John Chrysostom since we're talking about it. I know we're all over the place, but you know, this is teaching time, Michael. We've read probably Chrysostom pretty we've read him sufficiently on the subject of the images. Works of art fail, and we only look at them like things of clay. Yeah, I will read it, and then we'll come back to these quotes about images. Here is John Chrysostom talking about gold. He says, let no Judas then approach this table No, Simon, nay, for both these perished through covetousness. Let us flee from this gulf. Neither let us account it enough for our salvation, if, after we have stripped widows and orphans, we offer for this table a gold and jeweled cup. So he's saying, don't think that you're actually honoring God if you offer him the Eucharist blood of Christ and body of Christ in a golden cup, which you only obtain by neglecting the poor, the widows, and the orphans. God is not honored that way. He says, nay, if you desire to honor the sacrifice, offer your soul, for which also it was slain. Cause this to become golden. But if that remain worse than lead or potter's clay, while the vessel is of gold, what is the profit? He says, let not this therefore be our aim, to offer golden vessels only, but to do so from honest earnings likewise. For these are of the sort that is more precious even than gold, these that are without injuriousness. For the church is not a gold foundry, nor a workshop for silver, but an assembly of angels. That table at that time was not of silver. So he's talking about the table that Jesus offered the Eucharist on for the first time. He says that table at that time was not of silver, nor that cup of gold out of which Christ gave his disciples his own blood. Will you do honor to Christ's body? He's saying, do you want to honor that Eucharist body and blood? Neglect him not when naked. Remember Jesus said that if you do these things to the least of these, then you do it to him. He's saying, don't neglect Christ when he's naked. Do not while here you honor him with silken garments, neglect him perishing without of cold and nakedness. For he that said, this is my body, and by his word confirmed the fact, this same said, you saw me a hungry one, and fed me not, and inasmuch as you did it not to one of the least of these, you did it not to me. Even so do you honor him with this honor, which he ordained, spending your wealth on poor people, since God has no need at all of golden vessels, but of golden souls. And I'll just read this last part from John Chrysostom talking about gold. He says, for what is the profit, when his table indeed is full of golden cups, but he perishes with hunger? First fill him, being a hungered one, and then abundantly deck out his table also. Do you make him a cup of gold, while you give him not a cup of cold water? And what is the profit? Do you furnish his table with cloths bespangled with gold, while to himself you afford not even the necessary covering? And what good comes of it? For tell me, should you see one at a loss for necessary food, and omit appeasing his hunger, while you first overlaid his table with silver, would he indeed thank you, and not rather be indignant? What again, if seeing one wrapped in rags and stiff with cold, you should neglect giving him a garment, and build golden columns, saying, you were doing it to his honor? Would he not say that you were mocking, and account it an insult, and that the most extreme? Yes, give him what is necessary. That's the purpose of gold, that we would spend it on good works. Here's a great quote from Jerome. He says, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, and do you plan wide porticos and spacious halls? If you look to inherit the good things of the world, you can no longer be a joint heir with Christ. No big fancy buildings, no wasting gold on sacramental cups and bowls and plates. Okay, back to images. Here's some more quotes from John Chrysostom on images. Michael and everybody else who wants to hear John Chrysostom bash the images. He says, the same thing is done in our time also. Even now is there a king of the Babylonian furnace. Even now he kindles a flame fiercer than that. There is even now such an image, and one who gives command to admire it. Now, guys, I'm going to ask you a question. Michael, I'm going to ask you a question. Are you here, Michael? I have a question for you about Nebuchadnezzar. What was the sin in bowing down to the image of King Nebuchadnezzar? What was the sin? And I'll already answer for you. I'll cut to the chase with you. Because if you're going to say, oh, it was because King Nebuchadnezzar claimed to be God, let me ask you something. What if King Nebuchadnezzar had publicly announced to everybody in the whole land, I am not God, now worship my image. Bow down to my image. That's all he commanded, guys. It just says he told them to bow down to it. Would that have been a sin, to bow down to his image? If he had said, I am not God, Do not think of me as God, but I command you to bow down to my golden image right now. Would that have been a sin, Michael? Because I know the stupid response everybody makes. Well, it was because he claimed to be God. Guys, nowhere in that text did he claim to be God. He never said the words, I am God. He did not say that. He just told people to bow down to the image. So we're going to hear John Chrysostom, and I'm going to jump to a bunch of church fathers talking about why it was a sin to bow down to an image. Any kind of image. You know, Michael, have you ever heard this argument? Surely you have. They use this quote from Basil, where they say, the honor paid to the image passes to the prototype. By the way, Basil is not endorsing doing the very thing that he says other people do. He says other people, pagans, they bow down to the image of their king to honor the king. He doesn't say Christians do that. But anyway, let's just work with it. Let's pretend that that's something that's allowed. All right, Michael? Since that's their argument. They don't have any actual quotes from any church father teaching this doctrine that they teach. They only have Basil talking about pagans and other people bowing down to images of kings. Okay, so if you acknowledge you're allowed to bow down to a living king, we all know that. We know that Joseph and his father, Jacob, they bow down to a king. They bow down to King Pharaoh. And we know that Esther bowed down to King Xerxes, and that man was even a pagan. She bowed down to a king. That was not a sin. It is not a sin to bow down to a king. And we know that Abraham bowed down to the sons of Heth. And who else? Joseph, Esther, Daniel. Daniel certainly bowed down to King Nebuchadnezzar, living King Nebuchadnezzar, but he did not bow down to the image. So question, Michael, here's my question. Why was it a sin to bow down to an image of King Nebuchadnezzar? But it was not a sin to bow down to living King Nebuchadnezzar or the living Pharaoh or the living Persian King Xerxes. Why was it a sin to bow down to the image? John Chrysostom is about to answer that, but I'm just curious. Do you know the answer? It's a very simple answer. I'll give you a second if you want to think about it. All right. Let's see. Let's see what John Chrysostom says, and then let's see what some other church fathers say, because they all commentate on this. He says, there is even now such an image, and one who gives command to admire it. Now he's speaking metaphorically here. At his side are satraps and soldiers and bewitching music, and many gaze in admiration upon this image, so varied, so great. For somewhat of the same kind of thing is that image, or as that image is covetousness, which does not despise even iron, but unlike as the materials are whereof it is composed, it gives command to admire all, both brass and iron, and things more ordinary than they. So he's saying, covetousness compels people to admire brass and iron, and things ordinary like them. Let me read Hippolytus, in case you haven't caught it yet. Why it's a sin. Let's see here. He says, this is Hippolytus of Rome, another famous church father and a saint. Do the Catholics not consider Hippolytus a saint? I mean, they quote from him constantly. They always quote his apostolic tradition. He says, but why was the king not sorely pricked, having actually seen Daniel, who was a Jew? And why did he not say to him, why do you not worship the image? He no doubt would have said to the king, because I do not worship works made with hands, but the living God who made heaven and earth and has lordship over all flesh. Now understand the word here is proskuneo. It means to lie down prostrate, to bow down. He says, I do not prostrate works made with hands. That's the answer. You don't bow down to a created thing that your hands made. Every single church father says the exact same thing. Michael, you've got to be kidding me. Have you watched any apologetics from any Catholic or Orthodox? Haven't you heard any of them responding to the second commandment where God says you shall neither bow down nor worship? And they say you can worship, you can proskuneo certain people, just not images of false deities, but you can proskuneo to images of God, just like Abraham proskuneoed to the sons of Heth. They all know that the word proskuneo means bow, and they all say you can do that to the correct deities. That is not up for contention. They all believe you can bow down, that is proskuneo, to correct the right people, but just not to false deities. That is not part of the contention here. Yes, good question. Michael, I'll go over it. All right, here we are. Let's go over the basic principles. We have a great big video where we talk about image worship already, so I'll repeat everything from scratch. This is really why I should not start in the post-Nicene era. You should read all the church fathers, okay? Let's do it. How much more time do you have, Michael? Do you have 30 minutes? I'll go really fast. I'll go at light speed. Okay. Okay, what does Daniel say? We do not bow down to works made with hands. That is the entire principle. That is what this entire thing, this entire situation, this whole conflict rests on. These people think that God wants to be worshipped through physical objects. They think that God wants you to bow down to objects which represent him in some way. But God has never said that. God has always said he wants us to worship in spirit and truth. And that if you bow down to something that you made, if you're bowing down to your own works, or to some other work that a human made, you're not worshiping God. You're just worshiping your own art. You like to make artistic things and then call that God. Like John of Damascus said, I will not cease to worship the matter. So you worship matter. So what then are we forbidden to do? You are forbidden to bow down to lifeless things that your own hands made. It's that simple. I want you to repeat it so that you know our position and what the early church says. You're not allowed to bow down to something lifeless that your own hands made. You can bow down to a living person. That is not a sin. You can proskuneo to a living human being. God never said you shall not proskuneo to living human beings. He never said that. All throughout the Old Testament, you have people bowing down to living human beings. Let me show you. Well, you already know. You were just pointing it out. So if you know that all throughout history, it has been allowed, and God has even commanded it sometimes. If you know all the Israelites bowed down to their King David, you know Abraham bowed down to the sons of Heth, you know that Abraham, his nephew Lot, bowed down to the angels who had come to him. You know that bowing down to living human beings is not a sin, but bowing down to a dead image and making yourself a slave, a servant, same thing, of a dead image is a sin. Here's the Old Testament. I'm going to read you some verses from the Old Testament. This will not be fast if I read all the verses in the Old Testament. But look, you need to read this. Look at all these scriptures where God tells you why in the Old Testament you're not allowed to bow down to images. Cursed is the man who makes an engraved or molten image, an abomination to the Lord, the work of the hands of the craftsman. See? It's his own hands that made it. That's why it's ridiculous that he's bowing to it. So the substance of it, the fact that it's wood and stone, and the fact that the man made it himself out of these elements is what is being condemned. Not just who is being depicted by the image, but also just the image itself, just the thing. He says, even wood and stone in Deuteronomy. He says, let all that worship graven images be ashamed, who boast of their idols. Worship him, all ye angels. And the land was filled with abominations, the works of their hands. And they worshiped the things their fingers made. Do you see this, Michael? Do you see the emphasis on why it's so ridiculous? Their own hands made it. Carved images in Jerusalem. Yes, images, images, images. Every metalsmith is put to shame by an image, for his molded image is falsehood, and there is no breath in them. Do you see the emphasis on the fact that it's not alive? It's just a dumb piece of wood or stone or gold. They lift it to their shoulders. This is Isaiah 46. They lift it to their shoulders, they carry it, they set it in its place, and it stands there. It cannot move from its place. If one cries to it, it does not answer or save him from his trouble. See how they keep saying it's not alive? It can't even move. That's why you don't bow to it. Do you see why this applies to the Cathodox images? Can Cathodox images move? No. So why would you speak to it? Why would you act so utterly superstitious as to talk to a block of wood and think that you're honoring that person that you're drawing a picture of? You're not honoring them by having a block of wood and talking to it and bowing down to it and burning incense to it. Here's Habakkuk. What profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? A metal image, a teacher of lies. For its maker trusts in his own creation, and there is no breath at all in it. You see the emphasis here? Here's Deuteronomy. And there you will serve gods of wood and stone, the work of human hands that neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. By the way, the word that he uses here for serve, you will serve gods, that's latria, which means you're going to burn incense to them. So God says, neither bow down nor serve, that is, nor burn incense to them. These are the things we're forbidden. There are lots here. Work of men's hands, work of men's hands. They that make them are like them, blah, blah, blah. The work of the hands of the craftsman. You see the emphasis here, always that it's not alive and it's the work of their hands. Okay, now let's just read some quick church fathers' writings. You still with me, Michael? I'm going to go fast. I'm pretty much just going to read the purple quotes. We're going to skip the red and only read the purple. Got it? Here's Peter in Recognitions of Clement. This is quoted by Clement of Rome, and some people don't like this book of Recognitions of Clement. The Catholics don't like it especially because it utterly destroys them. But multiple church fathers say that this really was written by Clement, such as Epiphanius, Jerome, Origen. He quotes from it. They all believe that this was written by Clement. But anyway, we just continue. Peter says, "For what can either dead images or living creatures confer upon men, since the power of all things is with one?" He says, "Through the mouths of others also that serpent is wont to speak in this wise. We adore visible images in honor of the invisible God. Now that this is most certainly false." He says, "This is most certainly false. For if you really wish to worship the image of God, you would do good to man, and so worship the true image of God in him. For the image of God is in every man." And he talks, if you wish to honor him, then do good to him when he's hungry, give food to him when he's hungry, give drink to the thirsty, clothing to the naked, etc., etc. This is a wonderful book, and every Christian should read this book. He says, "But you are wicked against the God of all, worshiping lifeless images instead of him or along with him, and attributing his divine name to every kind of senseless matter." Yes, you want me to focus on the saints. Whatever, I'll skip to the rest. This is such a wonderful book, though. Utterly destroys them. And Melito of Sardis also references this book. Absolutely bashes it. No, let me read just a couple more, okay? The reason why, Michael, is because I want you to have this precedent. The early church fathers were reading this book. It's confirmed. We know that they were. We know from Epiphanius and Jerome that this book was read in the early church and that people consider this authoritative. They did consider this written by Clement. I'm just going to read you just 2 purple paragraphs, okay? Just 2. Just let me read this. "But, you say," now Peter's talking to pagans, "we do better when we are thankful at once to him and to all others." So to God and other gods. He says, "Now when you say this, you do not know the plot that is formed against you. For as when many physicians of no power promise to cure one patient, one who is really able to cure him does not apply his remedy, considering that, if he should cure him, the others would get the credit. So also God does not do you good when he is asked along with many who can do nothing. But others say, we are more pious than you, since we worship both him and images. I do not think, if one were to say to a king, I give you an equal share of honor with that which I give to corpses and to worthless dung, I do not think that he would profit by it." You see how he compares it to dung? "But someone will say, do you call our objects of worship dung? I say, yes, for you have made them useless to yourselves by setting them aside for worship, whereas their substance might perhaps have been serviceable for some other purpose, or for the purpose of manure." Doesn't that sound just like John Chrysostom and Ambrose? Saying, why are you setting up golden images? What is wrong with you? Okay, but fine, I'll keep going. Here is Clement of Rome. Let's see what his emphasis is on. Is it just on that images are depicting the wrong people? Or is it that that these images people worship are lifeless? They can't move, they don't breathe, and that the people themselves made them, and then they worship their works of art. Clement says, "Brethren, it is fitting that you should think of Jesus Christ as of God, as the judge of the living and the dead. And it does not become us to think lightly of our salvation. For if we think little of him, we shall also hope, but to obtain little from him. And we were deficient in our understanding, worshiping stones and wood and gold and silver and brass." By the way, he's using the word proskuneo, bowing. We were worshiping stones and wood and gold and silver and brass, the works of men's hands, and our whole life was nothing else than death. Now, I would just say, if Christians were still worshiping the works of their hands, why is he pointing this out as something foolish? Why is their whole life being called deficient in understanding and their whole life nothing else than death? If in the church it is still permissible for us to bow down to the works of our own hands, wood and gold and silver and brass. Do you understand the argument, Michael? Why would you say that? Why wouldn't you say, and we were worshiping the wrong deities in our images rather than Jesus in our images? Why would you just say, why would he say that we were bowing down to images of gold and brass? If, unless actual images of wood and gold and silver and brass are a problem. Bowing down to the works of your hands is a problem in itself. Do you understand the argument? I already went over Ignatius, who says, no, Jesus is more visible now. By the way, do you think he would say that if they were worshiping images where they could see Jesus visibly? And if they had a doctrine that, oh, now we get to see Jesus visibly and we're going to worship that face, like Peter hears and all the others say? He says, bow down to that face. You're going to be looking at that face for eternity. Is this a doctrine in the church? Bow down to this face on a picture. You're going to be seeing that face for eternity? Doesn't seem like it. Here's Matthias. This is his letter to Aristides. This is a very, very, very famous, one of the earliest apologetic works ever. And he's bashing them who bow down to images because he's speaking to a pagan. He says, is not one of them a stone similar to that on which we tread? Is not a second brass, in no way superior to those vessels which are constructed for our ordinary use? Is not a third wood, and that already rotten? And he says, is not a sixth earthenware, in no degree more valuable than that which is formed by the humblest purpose? Do you see how this agrees with recognitions of Clement? That's why I quoted to you. They're all saying the same thing. You know, somebody could say, I don't trust recognitions. I don't care. They're all saying the same thing. And he says, are not all these corruptible matter? He's saying you should not bow down to something that is matter. It doesn't matter to him that it's just the wrong deity being depicted. He's saying, no, you don't bow down to an image of corruptible matter. He says, might not these, which are now worshipped by you, that's the word proskuneo, I checked it in the Greek, might not these, which are now worshipped by you, again be made by men, vessels similar to others? Are they not all deaf? Are they not all blind? Are they not all without life? Are they not destitute of feeling? Are they not incapable of motion? Are they not all prone to decay? Are they not all corruptible? Do you see this, Michael? He's saying we don't bow down to corruptible matter. That's the emphasis. They are destitute of sense, he says. And listen to this part. He says, and next, I imagine that you are most desirous of hearing something on this point, that the Christians do not observe the same forms of divine worship as do the Jews. Now, you guys know how the Catholics and Orthodox always want to point out that the Jews would bow down to the Ark of the Covenant, which is just a complete lie. First of all, they were not allowed to look at the Ark of the Covenant. It was always covered with a veil, which was inciting them to think spiritually, not visually, which they'll never understand, these carnal people. But not only that, it wasn't just that only the priests got to see the Ark of the Covenant and they got to bow down to it and venerate it. No, the priest didn't bow down to the Ark of the Covenant. There was one priest once a year who was allowed to see the Ark of the Covenant. And even then, what is on the Ark of the Covenant, guys? 2 angels. And what are the angels doing? They're bowing. And are they bowing to each other? No. Angels don't bow to each other. What are they bowing to? Michael, what's the answer? What are the angels on the Ark of the Covenant bowing to, the ones that are facing each other? Yeah. God literally says, I will come and appear above the ark. He says, above the ark. This is what he says. And there I will meet you, and from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim that are upon the ark of the testimony, I will speak with you. So he is physically appearing above the ark between the cherubim. So the cherubim are bowing to God. Do you know how utterly insane it is to suggest that the priest who is allowed to enter the Holy of Holies once a year, who bows down in the presence of the ark, is bowing to the ark itself? How preposterous is that? Yeah, sorry, God, I'm not actually bowing to you. I'm bowing to your ark. I know you're physically here in front of me. I know that these 2 angels are bowing to you and that they're actually inciting me also to bow to you. But actually, you're kind of just getting in the way. I'm not bowing to you. I'm bowing to your ark. Do you know how insane it is to say that? But the Catholics say that, and I believe them. I believe them when they say that. They are speaking the truth. They don't worship God. They worship objects. And they really imagine that the Jews, the one Jew, the high priest once a year, was actually bowing to the ark and not to God, physically appearing in front of him. Absolute insanity. Nobody ever bowed to the ark, Michael. Absolutely nobody ever bowed to the ark. Get it? That is not an object of worship. They have made that up. And when they say that Joshua bowed down in the presence of the Lord, it is the same thing. God appearing. And by the way, it's only the Masoretic text that says he bowed down to the ark. The Septuagint says he bowed down in the presence of the Lord. That's something that the Jews added. Even then, even if he did bow down in front of the ark, it's because God is above the ark speaking to him. But most likely Joshua was not even in the presence of the ark because he was from the tribe of Ephraim. He was not allowed to go in the presence of the ark and look at the ark. So very unlikely. Most likely it was covered by a veil and all that. So no, the Ark of the Covenant was never an object of worship. Yes, I see that. Orthodox is Masoretic text, not Septuagint. What frauds they are, don't you think? Don't you think they are major frauds to have Masoretic text in an Old Testament translation? It's not in the Septuagint, Michael. Don't you understand that they're using Masoretic verses? The Old Testament in the Orthodox Study Bible is not consistently Septuagint. It has tons of Masoretic text in it. No, the New King James translators did not use the Septuagint. No, they did not, Michael. You are completely mistaken. Only the New Testament is New King James. Old Testament is partial Septuagint for the Orthodox Study Bible, and a lot of it is Masoretic. New King James part is only the New Testament. In the Orthodox Study Bible. My point is that they're totally inconsistent. You can look up Joshua right now and see that that is not in the Septuagint. They're frauds. You understand what I'm saying? The Orthodox are citing the Masoretic text, not the Septuagint, which says he bowed in the presence of the Lord. It doesn't say he bowed to the ark. Yeah, let's focus. Anyway, I bring that up because they say, oh yeah, we're like the Jews and we bow down to physical objects. Well, first of all, the Jews never did that. But even if they did, are we to do that? If the Jews do something, does that mean Christians automatically do it? Or did the Jewish way of worshiping God pass away? So it's two things against him. They're lying when they say that anybody ever bowed to the ark. That never happened. They actually bowed to Jesus physically appearing over the ark. And secondly, even if they had done it, we know that the Jewish form of worship has passed away and that that form of worship was only given to the Jews because of their carnal attitude. But we are more spiritual. At least we're supposed to be. So he says, the Christians do not observe the same forms of divine worship as do the Jews. The Jews then, if they abstain from the kind of service above described and deem it proper to worship one God as being Lord of all, are right. But if they offer him worship in the way which we have described, they greatly err. That is, honoring images. Do you see this? Look at this part where he says that they serve their images. He says, these you serve, that's dulia, these you worship, proskuneo. And you become altogether like them. For this reason you hate Christians, because they do not deem these to be gods. Talking about matter, lifeless things. They don't consider that to be God. And listen to this part. He says, this is a real banger right here. Get ready. He says, but those who imagine that by means of blood and incense, what? Incense? And burnt offerings, they offer sacrifices acceptable to him, and that by such honors they show God respect. These, by supposing that they can give anything to him who needs nothing, appear to me in no respect to differ from those who studiously confer the same honor on those things destitute of sense, and which therefore are unable to enjoy such honors. So for him, it's just a foregone conclusion that Christians do not bow down to images. He's saying, if anybody were to actually try to offer blood and incense and burnt offerings to God, that would be like offering these things to an image. Oh, and the Orthodox do that. Shamelessly. They offer incense to images. They think God is offered that way. Michael, do you know how crazy they are about offering incense to images? Thinking God and the saints are blessed that way. Utter nonsense. Is Matthias a big incense fan? Is he a fan of honoring images? Do you think that he could possibly say these things if the whole time he is offering images made of gold and wood? Do you think that is even a slight possibility? That is completely ridiculous. Of course they're offered to God. I'll destroy that one on another night, happily. I'll really enjoy it. But anyway, as I was asking, do you think Mathetes could say all this while simultaneously honoring images? Do you think he's secretly, after saying all this, do you think he's actually got images of gold or wood or brass or stone that he's actually bowing to and burning incense to? Or that his church is doing that? That's my question for you, Michael. He says, I suppose then you are sufficiently convinced that the Christians properly abstain from the vanity and error common to both Jews and Gentiles, and from the busybody spirit and vain boasting of the Jews. But you must not hope to learn the mystery of their peculiar mode of worshiping God from any mortal. So he's saying you're not going to learn how to properly worship God from a Jew or a Gentile. And yet what do the Catholics say? They say, we know how to worship God. We went to those Jews. And the Jews offer incense to God. And they deck everything out in gold. So we're going to do it too. Because those Jews, they were always so spiritual in their form of worship. God was always just praising them. Oh, you Jews who are just so spiritual in your thinking. You are so faithful, so loyal. And I always wanted to give you this law about the circumcision and the animal sacrifices. And I just always wanted to give it to you because that's how I've always wanted to be worshipped. No. If that were how God wanted to be worshipped, you'd still be offering blood sacrifices with a big physical Ark of the Covenant, with physical circumcision. But you're not doing those things anymore, are you? Because God hates those things. We'll talk about that in another video. The video against incense, where every single church father for over 400 years, almost 500 years, unanimously bashes the idea of offering literal incense to God. And they put it in the same category as blood sacrifices or circumcision. But I've heard this one before. The Catholics and Orthodox, they're so embarrassed. You ask them about offering incense to God, and they'll say, we're not offering it to God. We just, in all of our liturgies, say, this is our sacrifice that we're offering, just like in the Old Testament. But it's not really going to God. We just say, God, please offer this, please accept the sacrifice. Okay, here's Aristides. He says, the barbarians then, as they did not apprehend God, went astray among the elements and began to worship things created instead of their Creator. And for this end they made images, and shut them up in shrines, and lo, they worshipped them. Great then is the error into which the barbarians wandered into worshipping lifeless images, which can do nothing to help them. You see, lifeless images. They fell aside from the truth and went after the desire of their imagination, serving perishable elements and lifeless images. So now when he's saying serving, now he's talking about the actual incense part, sacrifices and incense. So they're bowing and they're serving. He says, but the Christians, O king, while they went about and made search, have found the truth. And as we have learned from their writings, they have come nearer to truth and genuine knowledge than the rest of the nations. They do not worship idols made in the image of man. You think he's tricking them? He's like playing a little gotcha. He's like, I mean they do, but the right kinds of images of man. A lot of images of man they reject, but some images of man they actually do worship. You know that the Catholics and Orthodox don't deny that Aristides is completely opposed to images. But I would just ask you, Michael, and everybody else listening, is Aristides saying something different? Is he in any way contradicting Mathetes or Clement here or Peter in recognitions? Or are they all saying the same thing? They're all saying the same thing. Here's Justin Martyr. Okay, you asked a question. What are the words for worship and idols? Is it proskuneo and icon? No, idol is eidolon, and worship is sometimes bowing, it's proskuneo, and sometimes if you ever see the word serve, it's usually talking about burning incense. It's the word latreia. Yes, what is the difference between idol and icon? An idol is just an image that's worshipped. Michael, don't get sidetracked. Are you missing it here? Are you missing the part that's being bashed? Don't be stubborn. Lifeless images. What is? Oh, read this sentence for me. They fell aside from the truth and went after the desire of their imagination, serving perishable elements and lifeless images. So what's being bashed here? Does Aristides approve of bowing down to perishable elements and lifeless images? Are you saying you think it's possible he thinks you can do this to certain perishable elements and lifeless images? Is that your contention? Michael, if he's saying, you're talking to Isaiah. Isaiah, don't distract him. He's trying to answer a question here. Michael, do you think that Aristides would make an exception and say we Christians worship some lifeless images? We bow down to some perishable elements and we burn incense to some perishable elements? Or is he categorically rejecting all service and bowing down, proskuneo, toward lifeless images? What do you think? What's your observation here? Who cares whether he's calling it idol or not? Sometimes he calls them images, sometimes he calls them idols. The reason he calls them idols is because people are worshiping them. And what is worship? It's bowing down, it's burning incense. Both things. You shall neither bow down nor serve, God says. You shall neither proskuneo nor latria. We're waiting for Michael's response here. Oh my goodness. You really are deaf. You just can't even hear what I'm asking you. I know that eidolon and icon are two different words. Painful. All right, we'll keep going. Brain has shut off. He says, and while we maintain, this is now Justin Martyr, he says, and while we maintain that men ought not to worship the works of their hands. See, do you understand? It doesn't even matter at this point what he's saying, whether he's using the word proskuneo or latria, because you do both. The Catholics and Orthodox do both to their images. So you're like, well, wait a second. Which one is he talking about? Bowing or burning incense? Which one is he talking about? What does it even matter? You're doing both of them. So it literally doesn't make a difference, does it? You do both. You make sure not to omit any kind of sin. You include all sins. He says, we maintain that men ought not to worship the works of their hands. And here he is talking about bowing down. We say that the very things which have been said by the comic poet Menander and other similar writers, for they have declared that the workman is greater than the work. So you got, would this not apply to images made by the Catholics? Is there not a workman involved when the Catholics make images? They don't latria? What does latria mean, Michael? Latria means burning incense. How many times do I have to say that? Latria means burning incense. Here, read this article. Look at all the Bible verses. Look at all the church father quotes. Latria means burning incense. They do perform latria. Yes, they do. Of course they burn incense to icons. Are you not to them, huh? Really? Both Eastern and Oriental do. So let's do a little diversion here. Okay, let's do a diversion here. You said you want to stay on icons. Now you're just denying reality. And this is, it's always like the last leg. So I guess we're making good progress with you, Michael. Whenever we reach a point where instead of denying that the church fathers really are condemning them, they instead just start saying, "Oh, we don't even do any of those things that they're condemning." Well, that's excellent. That's excellent. So are you saying if I can prove that they are doing those things, then you'll say, wow, they really are idolaters? Is that correct? If I can prove that they do bow down to the images and burn incense to the images as a sacrifice in continuation of the Old Testament law of burning incense to God, if I show that they say that with their own words, that they are continuing the Old Testament sacrifice, then will you say that they are idolaters by offering incense to images? Because if you think it's not even a sin, then why don't you start there? Why don't you say, Luke, I don't even think it is a sin to burn incense to images. You should just start there. Instead of saying, I don't think they do that. If you really think it's okay that they do that, just say, Luke, I don't think it's a problem. I think it's fine if they do that. Don't tell me they don't do that. So is it a sin? Is that what you're admitting? It would be a sin. If I can prove that they're doing it, you'd say that's a sin, and you're convinced that they are idolaters. Is that correct? Because I'm ready. No, okay, it would be idolatry. This is wonderful, Michael. This is wonderful that you just said that. All right, I'm going to show you some Orthodox sources saying that they are giving the incense to the image and that it is commanded by God. It is giving to the image, okay? And that it is also a continuation. And I can show you both Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox saying this. So you see on my screen, incense. Here's a little section here. Do you know what sensing images is? It's where you shoot the incense at the image. And by the way, incense, God calls, he considers this a form, well, an image, a picture, a shadow, a type of offering up prayers. Since incense flies up in the air and it's sweet smelling, this symbolizes our prayers going up to God. Get it? It ceased after the Old Testament. So, in the scriptures you can see this, how many times they talk about it. God says, and the priests who minister, that is liturgio, it's where we get the word liturgy. He says, the priests who minister to the Lord are the sons of Aaron, and the Levites attend to their duties, and they offer to the Lord burnt offerings morning and evening and fragrant incense. So who's the incense going to? God. It's offered to God as a sacrifice. And the showbread is set on the pure table, and the golden lampstand with its lamps burns every evening. Here in Numbers, he says, is it a small thing to you that the God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to do the service, that is, liturgy, of the tabernacle of Yahweh, and to stand before the congregation to minister to them? That's the word latria. And what is that ministering? It's burning incense, as you're about to see. Here's Sirach. Moses ordained him and anointed him with holy oil. It was an everlasting covenant for him and for his descendants all the days of heaven, to minister, that's the word latria, to the Lord, and serve as priest, and bless his people in his name. He chose him out of all the living to offer sacrifice to the Lord, incense, and a pleasing odor as a memorial portion to make atonement for the people. So what is the ministering latria? It is offering sacrifice to the Lord, incense, and a pleasing odor. Here in Chronicles, he says, the high priest says, my sons, don't be negligent now, for the Lord has chosen you to stand before him, to minister, that's liturgy, to him, and that you should be his ministers and burn incense. And they said, behold, we have sent you money to buy you burnt offerings and sin offerings and incense, and prepare you manna and offer upon the altar of the Lord our God. So this is part of the sacrifice, guys. The incense was always part of the burnt offering. It is a sacrifice. And I'm about to read you lots and lots of the Orthodox, both Eastern and Greek, Russian, and Oriental, all saying this is a sacrifice going to God. Okay, excellent, wonderful. Michael, you are agreeing then, if the Orthodox are offering incense to the icon itself, this would be offering a sacrifice to the icon. Okay, will they do it to all the saints too? Let's do it. Okay. And you also understand, Michael, that God created incense to symbolize prayers. So yeah, I mean, this is a total perversion. They're praying to icons. Okay. Well, if you're convinced from all these scriptures, look how many scriptures I quote here that talks about incense and its correct use and what it means. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots. Okay. Hopefully that should be enough for you. Nobody can ever say we don't post enough scriptures. All right, let's go down to the section at the bottom of the page. And here we go. Oriental Orthodox Church, this is what they have to say about incense. And Eastern Orthodox Church. Okay, you ready? All right, here we go. Here is Sensing at Home. This is an article that he posted. This is John Whiteford. This is one of their top theologians in the Eastern Orthodox Church. Sensing at Home. So you could read it here, or you could just read it from my copy and pasted post. Okay, ready? You with me, Michael? All right, Stephen, don't distract him, okay? We're gonna go ahead and read this now. Michael and Stephen, get ready. Let's read this, okay? Don't be distracted. John Whiteford. He says, it's a nice touch to have a cross and gospel in your icon corner. This is where your sensing would begin and end. You could just sense the icons in the icon corner, but if you wanted to, you could sense the whole room you're praying in, or other rooms too, if you wish. The offering of incense to God is a practice which dates back to the time of Moses, when God gave commands as to how to burn it. So you see how they're connecting? This is a continuation of offering incense to God. This is the sacrifice continuing. You shall make an altar to burn incense upon, and Aaron shall burn fragrant incense upon it. So he's quoting Exodus 30. Okay? And he says, the burning of incense as an offering to God will continue even to the end of the world, as revealed by God to St. John. So he believes this incense will always be offered to God forever. By the way, he doesn't understand that in Revelation that is spiritual. It's not literal incense. The incorporeal spirits, the angels, are not offering literal physical incense to God in heaven. That is such utter nonsense. And here he is. John Whiteford says, because of the command and revelation of God regarding the offering of incense, the church uses incense as an acceptable offering in its divine services. You guys remember the liturgy? Latria. Latria is performed in the liturgy. And latria is what? Offering sacrifices and incense. He says, since the parish church uses incense, so should the family church use incense as an offering pleasing to God. The charcoal and incense ashes should not be discarded in the garbage, but should be put along the foundation of the building. Look at all this superstitious nonsense. So they are offering incense to God. It is an offering to God. And he tells them how to go and sense the images. I mean, do you really think, Michael, sensing the images, as the pagans always did, do you think that can be an excuse can be made the same way the pagan would, that, well, I'm not actually offering incense to images. I'm not some superstitious person. I'm sending it to God through the image. Do you think that flies to God? It's superstitious. God doesn't accept the incense at all in the first place. This is actually like a double whammy. We really should just go over this entire subject, that God rejects all incense. If God rejects it to him, he rejects it even more that it's being offered to the images. That just makes him furious. Yeah, we have gotten distracted. Let's do this another night. Let's go over this another night, where we go over all the incense offerings to God in the New Testament. I'm drinking some water. Here, 1 second. Ooh. So true. They go beyond even the Jews. The Jews offer incense to God, and they offer incense to images. Okay, it's all right if you have to go, Michael. This is a long video. Look how much we have to read. Do you believe me now when I say that this is not just one or two quotes from the Church Fathers? It's actually more than 100. It's multiple hundreds of quotes from the Church Fathers on this subject. We don't bow down to lifeless images. You know, it really comes down to something. I need you in a call, Michael. I need you in a call where I can ask you this question, because you're gonna write this text. You're gonna give me some weird answer. You just need to answer the simple question: are the icons of the Orthodox and Catholics lifeless? Are they alive or dead? Anyway, you can go. I'll talk to you later. It's a simple question, everybody. It's what you ask the Catholics. Are your images alive? It's that simple. If your images are lifeless, and the church always says we do not bow down to lifeless images, it's over. It's finished. We do not bow down to lifeless images. Capiche? Pretty simple. Okay, I won't go all night, though. We can stop for now. It's why it's good to have some Catholics in here, is that you can force them to answer the question, are your icons alive? Okay. And what's being condemned? Are the church fathers just saying you're making images of the wrong deities? Is there a single church father in all these quotes that says, you guys are making the wrong kinds of images? Make your gold and silver images the work of your hands of the proper deity, and then it will be acceptable to God.
Look,
Do any of them say that? Yes, Raheem.
you know, you, I don't. People are. I don't even know what to say because you just read a lot of church fathers all condemning worshiping images and worshiping dead matter and these things. There is no Orthodox who can do that, who can say, all right, let's list all these church fathers rolling back from, you know, from the earliest to whatever point they want,
500
right?
years, yes.
Yeah,
Consistent, not one
right.
person contradicting.
No, but it's not enough evidence. It's just
There's just
crazy.
not enough evidence. It's like Michael said, what kind of evidence would convince you? Wow, I mean, imagine if we had this kind of evidence on any other subject and somebody contested it. How insane. You're right, Raheem. It's utter insanity. All the
Yeah, I don't know
doctrines.
I don't know what you can do. I don't know what you can do. I mean, if someone wants to reject the unanimous testimony of your early church with the mountains and mountains of evidence like to prove what you're saying, it's I don't know. It's just frustrating sometimes.
Yes. Well, I thank God that there's just such mountains of evidence. Mountains and mountains. So much evidence, guys, we couldn't even get through it all. It takes so many hours to read it.
It's also interesting how they don't. Uh, all right, as I was gonna say, it's very interesting that when you're because it's very interesting they'll not reject, but they'll ignore like the first few hundred years of church history. In this call, I mean, you said, um, I guess Michael said, oh, let's start with the first 300 years, 300 to 500, right? And that's baffling to me because you would think that logically someone would say, let's start with the earliest. Let's go back to the beginning, right?
Yes.
That should be the principle that we should live by. What did the earliest fathers say? But no, let's jump to the 300s to see what they say. Come on, yeah.
Michael, you say there are hours of videos from Craig Truglia. Tell me, Michael, in all those hours of videos which we've watched, does Craig or any other Orthodox apologist provide any quotes from the Church Fathers teaching the doctrine of bowing down to images and burning incense to them? Even one quote. You should be able to post it right now. Do it. Post the quote. We're waiting. Show us one legitimate quote. I know there are forgeries. I know there's the fake one from Athanasius in that fake book, Questions to Antiochus, which every scholar knows is completely ridiculous. It uses all kinds of language that's from like the 700s. Is not written by Athanasius. He's even using terms from the Council of Chalcedon hundreds of years after him, or at least 100 years after him, using all kinds of terms that hadn't even been invented in his lifetime. Is the most obvious forgery. Same with the Basil quote where he says, let me show you guys this quote. This will give you a good laugh. You guys will really enjoy this. I mean, these people are such frauds. I mean, give me a real quote is what I'm asking for. Give me just one real quote. Why isn't there even one? Even one wouldn't prove anything, just for the record. You need the whole church teaching it. 1 versus 50, which we've got 55 here, 1 versus 50 is not going to win the debate. But just provide one. You just said hours. Michael, you said there are hours from Craig Truglia. Give me one quote from a church father in the first 500. Look at how many hundreds of years I'm giving you. 500 years of church history. Give me one that teaches the doctrine of bowing to images and burning incense to them. That this is a doctrine of the church, that anybody does it. It doesn't even have to be a requirement. Just say that somebody does it. Just give it to me. One church father saying, and we bow down to the images of the saints. Just one.
What is he asking me?
I'm not sure. Look at this fake quote from Basil, guys. I'll share screens. You guys see. This is a well-known forgery from Basil. It's called Letter 360. It was quoted at the Second Council of Nicaea alongside some other forgeries that the Catholics and Orthodox know are forgeries. They admit it. They say, yeah, there may have been some forgeries there, but the Holy Spirit was still guiding them. Accursed is everyone who says such a thing. Here's this ridiculous letter. It's just this fake little thing that somebody invented where he just affirms some doctrines, and they just want to insert something at the very end and then just say, yeah, Basil said this. And look at how crazy it is. He says, wherefore also I honor and kiss the features of their images, inasmuch as they have been handed down from the holy apostles, and are not forbidden, but are in all our churches. What a completely ridiculous thing. Like, it's just, this is the most desperate thing I've ever seen from a forger. I honor and kiss the features of their images, inasmuch as they have been handed down from the holy apostles, and are not forbidden. I mean, does that sound like something Basil would need to say? And are not forbidden, but are in all our churches. I mean, just hilarious. And at the beginning of the letter, look at him using all this terminology. He says, I affirm, I adore worship one. I worship one God. I confess to the economy of the Son in the flesh. By the way, these are terms, as the footnotes say. I confess to the economy of the Son. This is stuff that wasn't invented until after the 400s, and Basil lived in the 300s. So he's using all these terms that hadn't even been invented yet. And he says, and I also confess that the Holy Mary, who gave birth to him according to the flesh, was Mother of God. Again, this is affirming things that were not even laid down in the church until almost 100 years later. These terms, these like, I affirm all these things, I don't deny these things. What? Nobody was even talking about those things at the time Basil was alive. And then at the end, he's like,
Um,
yeah, just all this
look,
fakery. Just one quote is all I'm asking for. Yes, Raheem.
I mean, it's so funny. He's like he's separating I guess, the Catholics from the original church, which, is basically him admitting that they are not the original church. You're basically saying, let's hear the other side out. Well, there's another side? And obviously,
You're saying Michael is doing that?
yeah.
Well, Michael's in denial. What do you mean, the other side of the argument? Michael, how have we not seen the other side of the argument? We have debates with the Catholics. You can watch the debates. How do you think we've so effectively refuted them and destroyed their arguments and prepared so many counter arguments against them if we have not heard their arguments? Of course we've heard their arguments. Their argument is that we honor Christ and the saints by bowing down to pictures of them. That's their argument. And what do they use to justify it? The Ark of the Covenant and catacombs, pictures in catacombs made by nameless people, which, again, it's multiple points against them. The first one would be that the church does not derive its doctrines from images on walls. That's totally ridiculous to say we're going to ignore the unanimous teaching of the actual authorities of the church. We're going to ignore that because we found some paintings on some walls made by some random nameless people at an unknown time. What? So what, if I find some random paintings on a wall denying baptismal regeneration or faith and works and the necessity of the sacraments, what, I'm just going to, if I see a painting on a wall that says Jesus is not God, I'm just going to say, well, Jesus is not God. I reject the universal teaching of the church for hundreds of years. I reject it because I found some paintings. I mean, is that really what you're going to do? But that's not even the worst of it, Michael. Actually, that is the worst of it. But then there's a second point. Not only does the church not derive its doctrines from wall paintings, what a maniacal thing to say, but also the wall paintings don't even bear any evidence that anybody was bowing down to them or burning incense to them. So bringing them up is completely irrelevant. It doesn't prove anything, you see? But I'm afraid Michael isn't listening. He's debating Raheem. I don't think he'd hear me anyway. Michael never did read any responses in text. I don't think he listens very well either. None of them do. Well, I hope at least you guys were edified, but some people are just too stubborn. Michael's already made up his mind. He says I have to respond to Craig Trulia. We did respond to Craig Trulia. Go watch our videos where we respond to Craig Trulia. See this video right here? Look at this. This is worthless, and this is a 1-hour video to Craig Trulia. There you go. We show that he's a liar.
Michael, what do you mean that it's dishonest? You're saying that, and Luke debating, we're only listening to him. I mean, who says that that is even what we're doing? And we're not just listening to Luke's own personal opinion, but he's showing us mountains of evidence on various subjects, giving us a unanimous testimony of the church. The most renowned fathers throughout all the biggest parts of the world, such as Alexandria, such as Carthage, such as Jerusalem, Antioch, etc. And he's showing us what the fathers taught on all these subjects. He gives us, he helps us to access the sources that he has so that we can go straight to the horse's mouth. So we're not just listening to Luke and following him blindly, and we have heard the arguments from the other side. And when we hear the arguments from the other side, we see that their principles and their philosophy is inconsistent, it's incoherent, and it does not hold up with how we know to define what is true. And we learn that from reading the fathers. If you've read Vincent of Legrand's commentary or commentary, I mean, he sums up how to define truth, how to define orthodoxy quite well, and he's not making it up himself because you might be like, oh, okay, why is it in the 400s and you guys are going to listen to this? But he's just summarizing what all the writers before have said. You said you need to listen and talk to both sides, and you need to reconsider your principles. I mean, you're just saying the same thing. So I just told you I have listened to both sides. Like when I hear Luke debate the Orthodox, like he absolutely demolishes them. I mean, he uses their own saints and doctors against them. They're inconsistent. They have novel doctrines. You said you need to reconsider your principles. Well, what principles would I go with besides those that were laid down from the beginning? What principles do you go by, Michael? Tell me. Luke has not refuted doctrinal development. Oh, did you mean like doctrinal development? Or proven that the fathers were I think you mean iconoclasts at all. I'm pretty sure you meant like doctrinal development, right? Um, well, I mean that's another thing to get into. We can talk about orthodoxy if you would like, but I mean all the fathers taught that the faith, doctrine cannot develop as the Orthodox teach. Like Irenaeus, for example, he says that we have a complete system of beliefs, and many other fathers say similar things to this. Separate issue, but I haven't heard him on the first point, and we didn't finish the icon video. So, like, what you want to talk about there right now?
Why
I
don't
mean,
you?
the faith was once and for all handed down to the saints. So, if that doesn't sound complete, then I don't know what to tell you. Did Christ hand down an incomplete faith, a faith that still needed to be developed, stuff that needed to be added on to or taken away? Because our faith has suffered neither curtailment nor addition. Yeah, because the Catholics and Orthodox say Saint Vincent taught doctrinal development. Have you read Vincent for yourself? Because I know they'll quote Vincent against the Protestants all day to be like, look, that we have the truth, da 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 da, this and the third. But if you read Vincent's section on doctrinal development, he does talk about it, but they say that you can invent doctrines or take away certain things. But what Vincent is saying is, for example, that
Well, he
a
says you
doctrine
cannot
can
add
develop.
anything. You can't destroy anything. Michael, obviously at this point you're not even answering us. This is why I always want to do calls where somebody can speak, because you are ignoring questions. You're not really speaking to us. You're just talking past us. So just go to bed then. Obviously it's hopeless with you because you're not responding to anything we've asked. You're just switching to doctrinal development. I've asked you questions. I've asked you, do the church fathers teach the Orthodox doctrine? Is there even one church father that teaches what you're saying? You're saying doctrinal development. You see, there's a difference between saying I took a doctrine and I refined it a little bit, compared to, oh, the early church completely condemns what we're teaching and we're reversing it and we're condemning them in return. Don't you think that's a little bit different? It's one thing to say, I'm going to refine this doctrine a little bit. It's another to say it is completely wrong and we're reversing and condemning it and anathematizing anybody. We're anathematizing the whole church for 500 years. There's a difference. You're not really here, though. You're not responding to us, though. You have to go, Michael. I think I will forbid to ever have this kind of interaction again. They need to speak with their words. It's cowardice. It's a refusal to really engage. We want to help you, but you don't really want to engage. It's just an exercise for you. You haven't answered anything in text. I gave you the benefit of the doubt. I assumed that you would, I gave you a chance to answer questions in text, but you refused to. So be it. It's obvious. The truth is obvious. If there were a single church father teaching what the Catholics teach in the first 500 years, it would be online. They'd be using the quotes, but there are no church fathers that teach this for the first 500 years of church history. Not even one. What an embarrassment. Crushing victory for the church. Crushing victory for the Ante-Nicene fathers.
Facts. I mean, I sure wish such a big practice of the church we had at least one quote, but it's all bashing it to no end. Eusebius, one of the main ones.
All right, well, I'm going to go to bed then, guys. It's going over a lot of the same material, but a little bit of new material, too. So much it would take a long time to go over it all.
I know that video, like where you read the quotes, was like 4 something hours. I haven't watched that one, but I will, because I want to learn like the 5 points against the Catholics.
Yes. 5 that take precedence.
No, yeah, because they have a lot of heresies, but like the 5 major ones, yes.
All right, well, I'll arrange some more discussions with the Orthodox. Farewell, everybody. Good night. God be with you.
Good night. Thank you, Luke.
You're welcome.